I'd like to call this meeting of the Clay County Commission to order. We will begin with our Pledge of Allegiance, if you would join me in that. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. Please call the roll.
Commissioner Nolte?
Here.
Commissioner Withington?
Here.
Commissioner Lawson? Here. Commissioner Wagner?
Here.
Commissioner Carpenter?
Here.
Commissioner Thompson?
Here.
Commissioner Johnson?
Here.
That brings us to approval of the agenda. Is there a motion related to the approval of this afternoon's agenda?
Move to approve the agenda.
Motion's been made for the approval of today's agenda. Are there any comments or any changes? Seeing none, you are recognized to close.
I close.
Please call the roll.
Commissioner Wagner?
Here. Aye.
Commissioner Withington?
Aye.
Commissioner Lawson? Commissioner Carpenter?
Yes.
Commissioner Thompson?
Yes.
Commissioner Johnson?
Yes.
That brings us to public comments. Are there any members of the public that would like to make any comments this evening? Or excuse me, this afternoon? Any members of departments or any elected officials? Seeing none. That brings us to immediate action. Administrator?
Yes, there are two items on immediate action this afternoon. The first item is approval of commission meeting minutes for November 16th at 3 p.m. and November 30th at 6 p.m. And the second item is Resolution 2023-11, and that is approving invoice payments from January 9th to January 12th for 380 invoices in the amount of $1,360,077.39.
Is there a motion related to our immediate action?
Yes, I move to approve both items for immediate action, commission meeting minutes and resolution 2023-11.
Motion has been made for the approval of our immediate action items listed, the two just indicated. Is there any discussion or comment? Seeing none, you're recognized to close.
I close.
Please call the roll.
Commissioner Wagner?
Aye.
Commissioner Withington?
Yes.
Commissioner Lawson? Yes. Commissioner Carpenter?
Yes.
Commissioner Thompson?
Yes.
Commissioner Johnson?
Yes.
That brings us to our regular agenda item. First item on our regular agenda this afternoon is 2023-13. Administrator?
Resolution 2023-13 is a request for the waiver of fees, interest, and penalties from Nikki Ritter. And I believe Ms. Ritter is here in the audience to present the request to the commission.
Please come forward. And for those who, while she's making her way up, anyone who wishes to address the commission, please make sure that the green light on the microphone base is on. Speak clearly into the microphone and please state your name so that for the audio recordings we know who we're listening to. Proceed.
Hi, my name is Nikki Ritter. I'm a 25-year resident of Liberty, and I'm requesting a waiver of fees incurred from my property taxes. My taxes were paid on time and in full. However, the transaction did not post until the day after.
Could you speak just a little bit more clearly? Into
Sorry.
Your microphone? That's okay. Thank you.
I'm probably the most nervous person in here, and I get to go first. So, anyway, it didn't post until a day after the payment, at which time another transaction posted, causing an overdraft of a few dollars. I did not realize this had happened until after the new year. I have overdraft protection on my bank account, so this shouldn't have been an issue. Unfortunately, my bank had removed my overdraft protection and placed it from my checking account onto my savings account for some reason, a clerical error, so that I wasn't aware of. I understand the $25 overdraft fee, and I'm not even really contesting that. It's the over $300 in fees that seem really punitive, considering the accidental nature of this oversight, and I've never been late on anything like this before. Additionally, I have health issues that make these fees a hardship to afford. And thank you. That's all I have. Thanks for your consideration.
Thank you. By the way, just to make you aware of the process so your expectations are where they need to be, the way this will proceed is we will then discuss it. If we have any questions, certainly they will be asked of you. This is the regular agenda for our work session, which means the decision will be rendered whether to put it on regular or consent agenda. Regular means we would discuss it again next week. Consent would be, we would vote as a group on all non-controversial and all items that do not involve the expenditure of monies. While, because this it does indicate the expenditures of money, this is likely going to be put on regular for next week. So I don't want you to think that it's somehow not being considered. And then at next week's meeting, we will be taking it up again, assuming it goes on regular agenda. And then there will be a motion made by one or the other commissioners here on whether to approve or not to approve.
Okay.
And we will go from there. So any information that you want to send us subsequent to what you said this evening, or anything that you want to say, you will have another opportunity to comment next week as well, if you so choose. Does that
Yeah,
pretty well
thank you.
laid out for
Thanks
you?
for that explanation. I appreciate that.
Okay. Are there any commissioners who have any questions of this person, of the citizen? Okay, seeing none, thank you very much. And like I say, any additional information, we'd certainly be happy to see.
Thank you.
I think given the circumstances, I think this would go on regular agenda for next week. Is that the consensus of the commission? It would go on regular agenda for next week? Very well. That brings us to 2023-14. Administrator?
Yes, Resolution 2023-14 is a request for waiver of fees, interest, and penalties and taxes due at the property at 5628 North Myrtle Avenue in Gladstone, Missouri. I do not know whether the applicant is here or not. If not, we also have County Collector O'Reilly in the audience to answer any questions that the commission may have.
Is the applicant present this evening? Okay, see that they are not. Would the collector care to comment? Here we are.
Barbara O'Reilly, Collector. Thank you for your time. This payment was a 21 payment that we're discussing. I have printouts if you need them. They sent to the bank a stub for their real estate and a check for the personal property. It was $190 some. Their real estate was $244. It was posted to the real estate, since that's the only stub we had, and the only check that we did receive. It was then, when the payments were posted, it showed that there was an error, so we reposted it to their personal property, which was the $190 some, and we would have sent them a bill for the personal property receipt that was paid, and then a bill for the real estate, showing that there was still a balance due. Our records do not indicate that we ever received the other check or the other stub.
Okay. Are there any questions of the collector? Okay, seeing none. Is there anyone else who wishes to comment on this issue? Seeing none. Once again, consistent with the last issue we heard, I would recommend that we put 2023-14 on for regular agenda next meeting. It looks to be the consensus of the commission, so that we'll go on regular next time. Thank you.
Thank you.
That brings us to 2023-12. Administrator?
Resolution 2023-12 is the consideration and approval of payments for the Clay County Prosecutor's Office from January 9th through January 12th. There were 5 invoices totaling $1,561.16. Staff would ask that the commission take action on this evening.
Very well. Is there anyone to the prosecutor's office to speak on this issue, or anyone else? Very well. Is there a motion related to 2023-12? I'm sorry, yeah, we need a motion because we would pass it this evening. That was the request, correct?
That is correct.
So I need a motion, and then we'll open it up for discussion.
I move to approve 2023-12.
Motion has been made for the approval of 2023-12. Discussion. Does anybody have any comments or questions that they would like to raise involved with 2023-12? Yes.
Just for fun, just because I feel like someone should ask, so what are the invoice payments for? Yeah, I know, but not everybody's watching that, so.
Does staff have any information they'd like to impart?
Yes, I'm bringing it up. So there are 5 invoices. One is to the Grundy County, Missouri Sheriff's Department for service fees. One is to for the 2023 Drug Task Force contribution. There are, one invoice is to pay for equipment for the prosecutor's project in the office. One is for, 2 are in reference to a conference that was attended by Prosecutor Thompson and also by a staff member, Higginbotham.
Thank you.
Further questions or comments? Very well. Motion has been made for the approval of 2023-12. You're recognized to close.
I close.
Please call the roll.
Commissioner Wagner.
Aye.
Commissioner Withington.
Yes.
Commissioner Lawson. Commissioner Carpenter.
Yes.
Commissioner Thompson.
I'm going to recuse myself.
Commissioner Johnson.
Yes. Very well, 2023-12 passes. That brings us to our next grouping, and that would be items 2023-15, 16, and 17, which are companion issues. Please proceed.
Resolution 2023-15, 16, and 17 are companion ordinances for the zoning and final plat, and also vacation of utility easements in the Creekside Ridge subdivision. Director Jones is here to provide information to the commission.
Please proceed.
Kip Jones, Planning and Zoning Director. So this one is a rezoning, final plat, and a vacation request. So I've got it pulled up on the screen. As it currently sits, it's 2 5-acre lots. You can see they're indicated in the 2 separate colors. It was platted in 2021, zoned to R5 at that point because that's our current standard for lots that are between 5 but less than 10 acres. MoDOT approved a shared access off of CC Highway. The proposal is to get rid of these 2 lots and combine it into 1 lot. It'd be a 10-acre lot. The zoning request is to be to R1, which is our current standard for a 10-acre lot. Also, there's a utility easement that runs directly between those 2 lots that the applicant is requesting to vacate. As part of the new plat, we would put utility easements around the boundaries of the new lot. Part of that vacation request, we reach out to utility companies to see if they have any objections. To this date, no utility company has objected. The surrounding area, just to give you an idea of where this property is located, that's the subject property that just popped up on the screen. This is Lucas Estates, which was platted last year into 3 roughly 9 to 10 acre lots that are similar to the lot that we're discussing today. This is kind of a nice mix of an area that there's some large ag zone lots that are kind of the light green color, and then the yellow color are R1 zone lots that are anywhere from 3 to 5 acres. So we feel that this lot size meets this surrounding area. That is the Clinton and Clay County line to the north. And then that's the intersection of CC Highway and C Highway. So it's about as far north as you can get in Clay County, just a little bit east of Smithville Lake. So let's talk about the comp plan and the land development code. So the comp plan indicates this is in the rural low density tier. Since we're combining 2 lots into 1, both staff and the Planning and Zoning Commission felt that this met the comp plan and the land development code. Now the land development code has 5 rezoning criteria that both the Planning and Zoning Commission and County Commission should consider with each rezoning application. I'm not going to read all that, but I want to highlight a couple aspects of it. It states that the project should be consistent with the comp plan. It states that it should be compatible with existing uses and zoning of nearby property, that we should be able to provide adequate public facilities and services to the subject property. Part of our process is to reach out to those outside agencies, fire district, water district, highway, and nobody objected to this proposal. And it also should not result in significant adverse impacts on surrounding properties. So staff and the Planning and Zoning Commission felt it met those requirements. We did receive some phone call inquiries. No concerns were expressed to staff. This case, as with any rezoning case, gets published in the newspaper. We posted a sign on site and sent 9 certified letters. The Planning and Zoning Commission voted 5-0 to recommend approval. with the two conditions that the applicant agreed with. I'd be happy to answer any questions the commissioners have, and the applicant is also present.
Very good. Are there any questions of staff on this issue?
Jerry. Hey, you said.
Commissioner Withington, please proceed.
You posted this in the newspaper. What newspaper is that?
The Courier Tribune.
Okay, thank you.
Further questions? Oops. Very good. Is there anyone else? Is the property holder here? And by the way, on these zoning issues, certainly the property holder, or I should say the applicant, is always welcome to comment. It's not necessary, but certainly you have the opportunity to do so if you would like. Okay. Is there anyone else wishing to comment on these three items? Seeing none. Since there is no controversy attached to this, is it the a consensus of the commission that these three items go on consent for next week? All right, we seem to have consensus for those three items, 15, 16, and 17, to appear on next week's consent agenda. Just for the benefit of the applicant, and if we have subsequent applicants on some of these others, if your item is put on consent, just to repeat, what that means is it will put on a list of non-controversial items that do not involve spending money. Next meeting, they will be addressed as a bunch, as a bundle, and they will be either approved or not approved. While it is possible to still have it removed from consent, certainly you're always welcome to be here, but that is certainly a good indication. Let's put it that way. With that, that brings us to 2023-18. Oh, I'm sorry, of course, yes, I kind of zipped by that. Yes, with the box marked approved. Very good. Thank you for that correction. That brings us to 2023-18 and 2023-19. Administrator?
Resolution 2023-18 and 2023-19 are companion resolutions for the rezoning and final plat of lots 9 and 10 in private gardens, and Director Jones is here to provide information for the commission.
Please proceed.
Kip Jones, Planning and Zoning Manager. So this case is very similar to the first case. We've got two lots indicated by the two different colors on the screen, one approximately 4 acres, one just a hair over an acre. This was part of a platted subdivision in 2004. It's zoned R1B, which is an old zoning district that we don't currently use. And the proposal, again, is to get rid of these two lots, combine it into one lot, rezone it to R5, which is our current standard for lots greater than 5 but less than 10. There is a utility easement that runs between the two lots. The property owner has chosen not to vacate that utility easement. We will still put utility easements around the outside of the property. The surrounding area a little bit. Here's the subject property. The next one is the Prairie Field subdivision that's currently being constructed at 112th and Plattsburgh Road. This lot that just went up there in blue is several parcels that are unincorporated currently that are going to be annexed into the City of Liberty as part of one of their developments. And then the yellow line is the current City of Liberty city limits. So very close to Liberty, and it's located in the urban services tier. Again, we're taking two lots, putting them into one lot. Both staff and the Planning and Zoning Commission felt this met the comp plan. I'm not going to go over each of the 5 rezoning criteria, but this has the same rezoning criteria as the previous case. We did receive some phone call inquiries from some adjacent property owners. No concerns were expressed from those property owners. Again, it got published in the newspaper. We posted a sign on site and sent a total of 43 certified letters to adjacent property owners that live within 1,000 feet. The Planning and Zoning Commission voted to approve with a 5-0 vote with one condition that the applicant agreed to. I'm happy to answer any questions the commissioners may have, and the applicant is present as well.
Questions for Mr. Jones? Yes, Commissioner Wagner.
Thank you. What is the condition that was asked for by the Planning Commission?
There are some minor changes to the recording copy of the plat, so
Okay.
just some grammatical changes.
Gotcha. And then on the easement that you showed, did I hear that it was not accepted?
They did not request that it be vacated.
Oh, there was not a request to vacate. Okay.
So it'll still exist. So if a utility company wants to put a line in there, they could, but it wasn't going to inhibit the property owner, so they chose not to do that.
I see. All right. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Okay, further questions or comments? Seeing none, if the applicant is present, would they care to comment at this time? We're here and no, we're good. Very good. Is there anyone else wishing to comment? Seeing none, this seems to have no controversy attached to it, so is it the consensus of the commission that 2023, 18, and 19 go on consent with the box approved, checked?
Agreed. Yeah.
Yes, Commissioner Johnson.
I have one question. Is it a procedural question? At the risk of embarrassing myself, and I do it all the time, so it's no problem. But why do, on issues like this, do we put them off till next week to vote on them? Can't we approve them today?
What we do is, because this is our work session, so unless there's, as with, let's see, 2023-12, there was a request to expedite it. This gives 2 hearings to make sure that there are any objections or any other views to be heard, that we give the chance for those to be heard.
So we can't approve this kind of stuff?
We
on a-
could if it were requested.
Okay.
And generally, it's the applicant or the applying agency. In the case of 12, the prosecutor's office requested that we handle that this evening because it required the payment in a more expedient manner than if we waited until next week.
Okay. My concern has always been the wheels of government seem to always turn slow, and if there's a way we can expedite some things, I'm all for it, but if you're saying we can't, then we can't.
Well, we can, but the request was not made. I'm sorry, did somebody else have something?
If I made that request, could that happen then?
Well, come up to the podium and please identify yourself. That way we get it on the audio.
Hi.
Commissioners, before we get going, maybe I could just, give a little parameter here. Your ordinances allow any matter to be approved on what I'm going to call first reading, but it has to be unanimous. So if even one commissioner is against it and just wants it to go to second reading, then it moves to second reading. But if a commissioner makes a motion and it's unanimously adopted, it would pass on first reading.
Right. Does it address the issue that you were wanting to raise?
Yes, if it was possible to be approved tonight, I would request that it would be as well.
Okay.
Pamela Newton, property owner of said.
Okay. I had not yet finished trying to get the consensus from the commission, so I don't, your point was raised in a timely manner, in my opinion. Is that right, Mr. Counselor? So, yeah, if there is a motion to that effect, it would be timely to do it at this point. Had we waited until afterwards, then no, it would not have been timely. So since we were in the process of getting and I realize I'm explaining it a bit, but I'm also trying to make sure that everybody kind of understands the rules of the road. So yes, since you made your inquiry prior to the commission being, expressing their consensus and that being pronounced, yes, you are timely in that particular motion. So, yes, I would just explain also that one of the reasons that we do it in 2 parts is to allow any dissenting person, because sometimes if someone sees something, this appears to have no controversy at all that I can find. But it gives a chance for anyone who might have questions, comments, or like to bring some additional information forward to the commission. It allows that citizen the ability to do that. So if you'd like to be recognized for a motion, I certainly would be open to doing that.
Certainly. First, let me say, yeah, I agree with everything that you've been saying, and my thought is my understanding is that the planning or somebody has contacted neighbors and put it in the paper, and nobody has really caused any kind of or any kind of objection to this, have they, that we know of?
That is correct. No objections.
So if that's the case, I move we approve it tonight.
Okay, so you are moving for the approval of 2023-18, 2023-19.
Yes, sir.
Okay, motion has been made. Discussion. Any other commissioners have any comments? Commissioner Withington.
So is it too late to do the same thing for his, what is his, 15, 16, and 17?
Yes, it is, because we already established the consensus of the commission.
Sorry.
Commissioner.
Commissioner Carpenter.
Yeah, well, and sort of along those lines, we do a lot of planning and zoning approvals as a commission. There will be many more in the meetings to come. I might suggest that we create more of a standard here rather than picking and choosing individual ones. So unless we are intending to do this on all non-controversial planning and zoning approvals going forward, we can make the decision as a group to do that if we so choose, but I would suggest we probably ought not do it just for one.
Yeah, Commissioner Carpenter brings up a good point, and that is, if this is sort of in policy, if we're going to change policy, perhaps not doing it in a spontaneous way, but doing it with some discussion would be appropriate. The reason that we would handle, for instance, like I say, 2023-12 was handled and disposed of this evening was because there was a compelling reason to do that. Otherwise, it also has the effect of cutting short public comment. So that's one of the reasons that we would, is that a pretty fair statement, Mr. Counselor, that this allows us to hear it, and then if there is any other comment to be made, it gives us the time period in which to do it in. Is that kind of the intent?
I think that's fair, and I think to maybe, I'm reluctant to jump in too much on my viewpoint, but I think I probably would echo what Commissioner Carpenter is, I think, suggesting, that if we're going to embark on this, which may be perfectly fine, it would be good to have some consistency, and I might suggest that maybe part of staff's report would be to encompass whether any opposition or negative vote occurred at the planning and zoning, or any neighbors have expressed anything, because obviously in that situation, we might have a neighbor that couldn't make it tonight, but could next week. But something that sailed through without opposition by any neighbor, and without a negative vote at planning and zoning, certainly might be one that could at least be pointed out by staff, and you guys could incorporate that into your decision. Would be perhaps a suggestion.
Commissioner Wagner.
Thank you, and I tend to think that's what prompted our colleague to make the recommendation that he has, is just those things that you've just mentioned. But I do agree with Commissioner Carpenter's take, which is let's have some consistency of policy, so even those who are coming before the commission have some idea of what expectation they should have. And God love you for just jumping on that one. It's good, but I think it is important that we provide guidance to staff, because in the end, I'm kind of looking for staff to make that recommendation, that based on what they've seen, we believe this is something that you can consider today. Because they're talking to all the applicants, they're dealing with the commission, and I guess I'm used to having the staff be able to say, you either have a minefield or you don't, and therefore you can take action, or maybe you shouldn't. But having a very clear understanding of what guides that recommendation, I think, is very, very important as well. But at the very least, all those things that we just mentioned, I think that's what our colleague picked up on, and thus his suggestion today. So I understand that completely.
Commissioner Lawson.
Yeah, the only thing I would say, we've made the suggestion that it could happen. Everybody seemed to be in accordance. I've often wondered that, sitting out there watching you or being up here, what are we delaying this for? If you have asked the neighbors, they have gotten all kinds of notification, it's been in the newspaper, then just get it off of our table and let's get it approved. If they had a problem, they sure had time to respond by now. So I think since we've given these people some hope, and she's sitting there smiling, yay, it's going to be done, we should go ahead and do it. And the other thing I have to say, Jason made a great suggestion. Here this other guy sits out here, poor guy, and he has to wait a week. Is there a procedure that could say, we're going to go back to this, we're going to rescind what we said, and now we're going to go ahead and get this done for him too while we're at it? Or is that too late?
Well, first off, yes, Mr. Counselor.
I apologize. Just keep in mind, we've not voted on 15, 16, 17. That vote comes later, when we actually vote on what goes on consent, what goes on regular. Up to now, all we did was kind of work by consensus. This one feels like it could be on consent. Other matters should be on regular, but no vote has occurred on anything on this regular agenda.
So we could
I would say, if you wanted to revisit it, I think you're perfectly within your right, because no votes happened.
So what you're saying is, it would still be timely in that case?
I think so. I do.
Okay, well, thank you for the, okay, so, yeah, my opinion
can
was
we,
incorrect. But one of the things I'd like to say about this is, we do it in two parts for a reason. That is because zoning and planning and zoning issues are serious. Once we have done it, you don't call it back. So if we are to approve something and then there's some kind of a problem, then yeah, we don't walk that one back. We just live with it. The other thing is, we've had these come up before where somebody has in fact made a case that they had a compelling reason to have it adjudicated at this moment. There is no such case that I've heard been made. It's more, I guess for me, it's more of a question as to why, not why not, and why, just so we can get it off our calendar, is a reason I'm not entirely comfortable with. Why, so that they could move on would be nice, but nobody made the case that they needed to have this done quickly. My first thought process is prudence says take these steps as you go. Usually when these are controversial is when this comes up, but it is not unusual on controversial ones to have information come up subsequent to our first hearing, more information. So I just point that out as kind of historically how it has gone. If we're going to do this, I suggest that we don't do this piecemeal, but that we somehow start formulating some kind of a policy change. Yeah. Because otherwise, we get into others of these that would go on consent, and do we pass them all now? In that case, you know, we might as well just pass them all at this moment. I'm not saying that's good or bad. What I'm saying is that's a policy change that should be considered. Commissioner Thompson. Mr. Jones.
Yes, so we actually already started a revision of the code that's going to streamline the process. I'm not sure exactly how that's going to end up, but cases like this where we're combining lots or just moving a property line, or possibly even considering if it's just a 1 or 2 lot subdivision, where there's going to be a process where it doesn't go in front of Planning and Zoning Commission or County Commission. So I think, I would expect that to get that in front of Planning and Zoning Commission in March and County Commission in April, most likely. So we're working on correcting this and streamlining the process. We're also happy to make that recommendation in that meantime if we have cases that we think are non-controversial and could be approved the first night. We're happy to make that recommendation, but I think we've always followed this process of 2 steps to give the adjacent property owners all the time, you know, that we could to oppose something if they chose to.
I don't mean to put you on the spot, but in a way we kind of are, and that is I would feel more comfortable proceeding for that action if the planning and zoning, if your department said, yes, we do not consider this to be an issue. Now that is a question that this is a rather spontaneous question to be asking you, and I don't want to put you on the spot, but I guess that would be one question when we're considering doing these things basically on immediate action is, does staff feel comfortable going forward with that? I don't want to put you on the spot,
No, please
but that's
do.
kind of the deal.
And everything on the agenda tonight, I consider non-controversial and could be approved today if you chose to.
Okay. So, well, first off, because as the counselor pointed out, so what we will do, I think, at this moment is we will go on the issue that is on the table, which is 18 and 19. And then once we have done that, if you would like, we will go back to the previous 3 items and deal with those. So just in doing these in the proper order, does that sound the proper procedure?
So 2 things. One, I don't know that I heard on the motion to check the boxes approved, so I think that should be part of the motion.
Right.
And number 2, I just want to confirm that everybody understands, under our current operating ordinances, any commissioner who votes no, 1 vote is enough to move it to next week.
Correct.
That's all it takes is 1 no vote to move it next week.
Excuse me. Yeah, that is a very good point to raise. That is 1 dissenting vote, and it fails. So it must pass unanimously, which is, again, a safeguard. So with that, I will go back. If there are no further comments, I will go back and I will recognize Commissioner Johnson. And yeah, I would echo what the counselor said, and that is, don't do what I did, do what I say, and that is indicate the box to be approved be checked. So with that, you're recognized.
So I just need to amend my motion to check the box approved. I do so. I would actually like to make one more comment, if I could.
Of course. Well,
agree
you
with-
made the motion, so certainly now we're open for discussion, so go right ahead.
So I agree with Commissioner Carpenter on, I think we should have some kind of policy moving forward. My whole underlying issue is that I would like to see Clay County government more user-friendly, if that makes sense. And certainly if there's a reason to put something off for another week, let's do it. But unless we have an articulable fact, reason why to do that, I don't think we should. I think it just delays things. I think that's common in governments in general. It's like, we always wait for the commissioner, the city council, whatever, to meet next week, and then they're going to put off next week. It's like, so people are waiting, staff's waiting, people are waiting for weeks, when I don't think is necessary. The flip side of that is, I think it's important, like Presiding Commissioner Nolte said, is that we don't push things through when there may be some opposition to it. And hopefully the neighbors and those kind of things have already been spoken to and that kind of thing, but it can also be used as a way to maybe push through things that on the sly or, kind of sneaky political moves that I'm not in favor of. I'm only in favor of doing this kind of thing when we all know we approve it. We all know we're not going to even talk about it next week. We're just going to approve it. And there doesn't seem to be any kind of opposition from any neighbors anywhere else. When it's that clean, that simple, and it looks pretty simple to me, that's the cases where I think, we should just approve these, move them on down the road so they don't have to wait any longer. So that's kind of my opinion on it.
Okay.
But again, I'll say that I've got a couple of senior commissioners here that know more than I do about these procedures, and maybe there's something that I'm missing here, but that's just kind of my thoughts.
Okay, the motion has been made, so we'll open up for discussion. I just want to say that I don't have a problem with doing this particular thing. What does cause me a little discomfort is changing our procedure in the middle of a procedure. It would be nice to have this brought before the commission for a discussion on, are we going to change the way we do business, and have all commissioners weigh in rather put us on the spot. So we've got a citizen saying, so are you going to do this? I think we should be looking at it in the light of the broad policy and not the particular issue. So I would just request some caution when we talk about spontaneously changing commission policy without consulting the other commissioners. That's a problem. Further discussion, Commissioner Carpenter.
Commissioner, thank you. Just a quick question for County Administrator. Trying to get some clarity on what the policy will be going forward, because I'm perfectly comfortable with moving this forward today. Like I said, I just think we need to do this consistently if we're going to do it. Is the idea then that in consultation with Director Jones that this would go on like the immediate action going forward if staff felt that is where it best belonged, or what are we thinking going forward is going to be the policy?
So to answer your question about those items, once we get direction on what your parameters are, so if your parameter is there's no opposition, it seems to be that it is, a simple process, a lot split, or whatever we're doing, we certainly could then put it up under immediate action. So once we do that and you saw it on the agenda, then you would know it is staff's recommendation to approve it at that meeting. And certainly anything that's on the immediate action on the agenda, the commission has the ability to pull it from immediate action and have it considered under regular if you choose to, say, we've now heard opposition. And so now we'd like to take another week. So that's always, just because we put it on immediate action doesn't mean that you have to leave it there. But if that's your direction and you're directing us to give you that recommendation, that's certainly where we could put it on future agendas.
Okay, that sounds like it makes sense to me going forward, especially in these few months before the policy change goes into effect on some of these simpler items. So just want to make sure if everybody's on board with doing that going forward, sounds like it. In that case, I will support the motion.
Commissioner Wagner.
Thank you. I'm reminded of the old adage, hopefully I won't get bleeped, but the road to hell is paved with good intentions, and we've got a lot of good intention here today, and I certainly support the intention behind that. I guess what I will request is, since we're kind of doing it on the fly, and now we're setting some precedent today, and so I am assured that the word will get out that, hey, you can actually get it done faster than what you thought you could. I do appreciate the idea of putting this on immediate action as a recommendation. I would like a little more meat on the bones, though, Kip, if it is possible, as far as before we have other items that come before us, knowing that you've got kind of a bigger plan ahead, but I think it would be appropriate to communicate to the commission that as these things are coming, at least in the short term, these are the sorts of things that would lend to a recommendation of passing it immediately, just so that there's a little bit of a playbook there, even if it's just a small playbook, so that if, as you're talking to people and people are coming forward, they understand their expectations, and we have our own expectations of why we would move forward more quickly. I think that's important because, again, we could create a whole new mistake just by saying we agree, and I'd just like to avoid that as much as possible.
So as Director Jones indicated, there is a bigger project in the works.
Right.
But I think to help accommodate is what I think you're suggesting. How about if staff would come back and present to the commission in discussion maybe next week? These are the guidelines in which we would utilize to recommend to you for immediate action. Get your feedback on that. And so we kind of have those parameters which help us explain to an applicant why or why not theirs might get recommended to be approved in one night's reading versus taking 2 steps.
I would appreciate that, just because, as it always happens, someone says, well, I'm just like this, and therefore you should do the same action for me that you did for them. And just trying to set some kind of parameter, even if it's in the short term, I think would be very helpful. So I appreciate that in the work on that.
Mr. Jones, if I understand correctly, the staff and yourself were formulating a way to resolve some of the issues that we've been talking about. So in a way, if we start doing this, we've sort of jumped the gun on you guys. Is that, I'm not asking you to agree with my characterization, but you guys are putting together a policy that we would then discuss and adopt as a commission.
Yes, the land development code would need to be revised. That would go in front of the Planning and Zoning Commission, generally at 2 meetings, and then it would come to County Commission for formal approval.
Okay. And obviously, as the counselor pointed out, if we go for a one-night thing, if it were rejected, what would be the consequences of that, Mr. Counselor? So say the motion was made and say one commissioner voted no. Does that throw it back to the beginning of the process?
I think, my assumption is, it'll certainly go to the next meeting. My assumption is in that situation, probably just be put on a regular agenda.
Okay, that was why I was asking, because by asking for a spontaneous vote, if it fails, so we're talking about the vote would be whether to, is this going to require 2 motions, whether we consider tonight and whether we do it? Because the thing is, usually if we reject an application for a zoning, it's gone. Then if the applicant wants to start over again, they are free to start from, not necessarily square one, but start the process over again, go back before the,
So conceptually, the way our current ordinance is written for operating reasons, think about it as you are not voting, if you were to vote on the motion right now, you're not voting to approve or disapprove the resolution. You're voting whether or not, all you're voting on, in my opinion, is whether you want to unanimously approve. Should you not unanimously approve, you've not rejected the resolution, you've just moved it to next week. So it is not a no vote on the resolution, it's a no vote on on passing it unanimously.
and I'm glad you clarified that, because that's what I was wondering about, because traditionally, so you've kind of pared that down a little bit, because in trying to do a favor for the applicant, I wanted to make sure you weren't, in fact, inadvertently denying them what they would have a majority vote for, but not a unanimous vote. That would throw them further back in the process and cost them, whatever the time element would be there.
Yeah, I understood that. I understood what Counselor said.
I did too, but I wasn't quite sure that was the case. So I appreciate the counselor pointing that out, because what I wanted to avoid, among other things, was a vote that would be less than unanimous, and the applicants would get to start back again at the beginning of the process, which I don't think that they would be particularly happy about, would be my guess. And then I'll just repeat the other point, and that is, spontaneously changing policy, especially when that policy is being reviewed by staff, it raises concerns in my mind, especially when no other commissioners were prepared to discuss a policy change.
Well, my response to that is anybody can vote no. We all have a vote. I'm just one of 7.
No, totally understand. I'm just pointing out that this constitutes, as Commissioner Wagner pointed out, this constitutes precedent, and therefore, maybe not quite a change in policy, but certainly it's going to make it difficult if there is another issue that comes up that maybe has a small bit of controversy, or that one commissioner is a little bit concerned about. So I'm just trying to make clear that changing policy spontaneously is not our best route.
So I disagree in the fact that if there's something that comes before us that has an issue, then you can put it to the next meeting if you want to. This is only simply for things that are very clearly supported by the commission. There's no objection from anybody in the community. Kip is certainly on board with it. It's Mr. Jones. So I don't think that's the only thing.
Just a moment. I don't mean to interrupt, but I don't know. I think Mr. Jones is giving us factual information. I don't believe Mr. Jones is indicating whether he approves or disapproves. He's giving us the facts of the matter, and we are to decide.
That he didn't see any objections from
Okay, that's
anybody.
more accurate. Yes,
That's what I meant. So yeah, no, I'm fine with it.
Any further comments or questions? Seeing none, you are recognized to close. Do you have any closing remarks, or you can just say, I close?
Nope, I close.
Very well, call the roll.
Commissioner Johnson,
Yes.
Commissioner Withington,
Yes.
Commissioner Lawson. Yes. Commissioner Wagner.
Aye.
Commissioner Carpenter.
Yes.
Commissioner Thompson.
Yes.
I don't think I vote on this one, do I? No. You were looking up at me like you were getting ready to call my name, and I don't believe this is an occasion where I vote. Very well. That and is with the box approved marked. That is 2023, 18, and 19. Commissioner Withington, I'm going to recognize you. I believe you wanted to revisit 2023, 15, 16, and 17. Is that correct?
Yeah, I would like
You're
to.
recognized. Please proceed.
All right, I would like to make a motion that we check the box approve on 15, 16, and 17 and vote to approve that tonight.
Motion has been made for the approval of 2023, 15, 16, and 17 with the box approved, checked in the appropriate places. Discussion. Commissioner Wagner.
Thank you. Just to keep recommendations with votes, just to reiterate what you had said earlier, Kip, you would not have an objection, or you see no reason for objection for a move today?
Correct. This is another case where we're combining lots and just vacating a utility easement. A pretty simple, non-controversial case.
Very well. Thank you.
Okay. Any further discussion? Seeing none, you're recognized to close.
I close.
Please call the roll.
Commissioner Withington,
Yes.
Commissioner Lawson. Yes. Commissioner Wagner.
Aye.
Commissioner Carpenter.
Yes.
Commissioner Thompson.
Yes.
Commissioner Johnson.
Yes.
Okay, that brings us to our next group of combined issues. That's 2023, 20, 21, and 22. Administrator?
Resolution 2023-20, 21, and 22 is consideration of rezoning the preliminary plat and the final plat for the Quail Run Farm subdivision, and Director Jones is here to provide information.
Please proceed.
Kip Jones, Planning and Zoning Director. So this one's a little bit different. Currently, it's a 49, almost 50-acre parcel that's kind of shaded in the orange there. It's currently zoned agricultural, has one single-family residence. It's located off of Plattsburgh Road. The proposal is to create a 6-acre lot around the house and leave the rest of the acreage as is. So the part in yellow meets one of the exemptions out of the Land Development Code, which is it's 40-plus acres with 100 feet of road frontage with access. And since it meets that exemption, it does not have to be included in the plat. So the only lot on the plat is the 6-acre lot. Here's the surrounding area. That's the subject parcel, the 6 acres. There's the 40 acres. Here are some 3 to 5 acre lots right across the street. And that is the far eastern boundary of the Smithville Lake Reservoir. So this area is a unique area as well. It has a lot of large ag zone lots, which are in the kind of light green, but then it has those small most of those are 3.5 acres lots across the street. So we think the 6-acre lot fits this area. This is located in the rural low density tier. Since we're creating a lot, that tier will tell us what size lot we can do in this area. You know, a 20-acre lot is acceptable throughout all of unincorporated Clay County. And in this tier, there's an exception for a 5+ acre lot as long as an agricultural land preservation is included. That ALP, as we call it, is just a way for the county to preserve a portion of the lot. It's designed to protect like streams, ponds, wooded areas. The applicant picks that area. In this case, it was 25% of the lot. The biggest things they can't do in there is build a house or put an accessory building. Has those same 5 rezoning criteria, which both staff and the Planning and Zoning Commission felt have been addressed. We did receive some phone call inquiries. Concerns were expressed about the possibility of the larger acreage being developed. But again, if that larger acreage is developed, that's a separate case where they would reapply, new letters would go out. In my opinion, it has very little to do with the 6-acre lot that we're creating today. We had one citizen speak at the Planning and Zoning Commission meeting. It was not in opposition. It was questions about what would happen if that 40 acres ever got developed. And again, it would be a separate case. Everybody would get noticed. It would go in the newspaper. Same process that we follow with this case. The Planning and Zoning Commission did recommend approval with 3 conditions. I want to point out a couple of those conditions. One is the inspection of the pond. That's already been completed by the applicant. NRCS does free inspections for folks that go through the subdivision process. There's some changes to the recording copies of the plat, and then the Highway Department has requested that the south driveway entrance be gated or removed, and the applicant has agreed to those conditions. There have been no objections from outside agencies, and I'm happy to answer any questions the commissioners have, and the applicant is present as well.
Questions of Mr. Jones? Anyone from the commission have any questions they'd like to ask? Commissioner Withington.
What's the purpose of the Highway Department wanting the driveway gated?
It was not a safe access, so they don't want it used any longer.
Okay, thank you.
Further comments or questions? Commissioner Johnson.
So the person that inquired at the planning commission, were they satisfied with what they heard, or do you know? I guess that's, you have to make kind of an assumption, but.
Yeah, so I would say, I would not express what they said as opposition. I think they understood the process, that if that 40 acres would be divided, that they would get notified again and have a chance to speak at a public meeting.
Other questions? Commissioner Wagner.
Thank you. Just maybe as a follow-up to Commissioner Johnson, after that meeting, there was no subsequent communication from the individual who spoke before?
No, sir.
Okay, thank you.
Further questions or comments? Seeing none, would the applicant care to address the commission? And once again, please identify yourself and speak clearly into the microphone.
My name is Tom Glennon. I've lived at the same address for 53 years. We're downsizing, moved down the street on Plattsburgh Road, and we just want to sell off a parcel and keep the rest of it. And I'd ask, based on the previous resolution of the case, that you approve this tonight. I see no reason for this to wait for another week or whatever it is. I agree with this young man over here. Thank you. Any questions?
Any questions of the applicant from the commissioners? Seeing none, is there anyone else, is there anyone else wishing to comment on these issues? Okay. With that, I will ask for if there's not going to be a motion, I'll ask for a motion. If there is no motion, then I will ask whether or not it goes to consent or regular agenda. So I will first see, is there a resolution that a commissioner would like to make on issues 2023, 20, 21, and 22? And please, if you do make that motion, indicate box checked.
Yeah, you got it, Scott?
Go ahead.
Okay.
You're fine.
Yeah, I would like to make a motion that we check the box approve on 20, 21, 22, and is it 23 also?
No, 22, I'm sorry.
22.
I may have gone one too many.
Okay. I'd like to make a motion that we approve, check the box approve, and take a vote.
So, yes, the motion's been made to approve those 3 items with the box and approved, checked. Very good. Discussion. Seeing none, you're recognized to close.
I close.
Please call the roll.
Commissioner Withington?
Yes.
Commissioner Lawson? Yes. Commissioner Wagner?
Aye.
Commissioner Carpenter?
Yes.
Commissioner Thompson?
Yes.
Commissioner Johnson?
Yes.
Thank you very much. That brings us to another group of companion issues, that would be 2023-106 RZ/F. Excuse me, no, I read down the wrong line, excuse me. Let me restart that again. So that brings us to 2023-23, 2023-24, and 2023-25. I'm sorry, I was reading the next line down. Please, so Administrator, please proceed.
Resolution 2023-23, 24, and 25 are companion resolutions for the consideration of the zoning, final plat, and vacation of easement for the Deer Run Acres subdivision, and Director Jones is here to provide information.
Please proceed.
Kip Jones, Planning and Zoning Manager. So this case is similar to the first two cases. It currently exists as 3 lots. It's approximately 40 acres. You can see the 3 lots shaded in the different colors. It was platted in 2022. They're zoned R1 currently because they're all between 10 but less than 20 acres. There's multiple easements that run across the property, including a gas line easement and a power line easement. The proposal is to get rid of those 3 lots, combine them into 2 lots. We would rezone them to agricultural because they meet the 20-acre minimum for the ag zoning. Agricultural land preservations are not required in the ag zoning district, so that we do not need to do an ALP. There are utility easements that are requested to be vacated along the old property lines, but again, the new plat would establish new utility easements along the outside of the new property lines. We reached out to all the outside agencies and utility companies and received no objections to this case. Here's the surrounding area. That's the subject parcel. That is 92 Highway to the south, E Highway to the north and east, and Smithville Lake Reservoir to the north and west. This area, you can see there's still some ag zoning, but it's heavily residential. So these lots are quite honestly larger than a lot of the lots in this area. The yellow and the kind of the darker brown lots are anywhere from 5 to 10 acre lots, and we're talking about 2 20-acre lots on this project. So again, the comp plan says this is in the natural resources tier. We're combining lots. Both staff and planning and zoning feel this is consistent with the comp plan, and it has those same 5 rezoning criteria. We received phone call inquiries. No concerns were expressed either before or during the Planning and Zoning Commission meeting. This case was published in the newspaper. We sent 28 certified letters, and the Planning and Zoning Commission voted 5-0 to approve with the 2 conditions that you see on the screen. Happy to answer any questions the commissioners may have, and the applicant is present as well.
Very good. Are there any questions of Mr. Jones on these issues? Commissioner Johnson.
Just out of curiosity, how do you decide who to send those certified letters to?
We create a list. In the code, it requires that we send it to everybody within 1,000 feet. So we create a list and triple check that list to make sure we send it to the right folks.
Any other questions or comments of Mr. Jones? Mr. Wagner, excuse me, Commissioner Wagner.
Thank you. I'll respond to Mr. too. But along those lines, from where does that 1,000 feet start?
From all the outside boundaries
From the complete
of
outside boundary.
whatever's being rezoned or the subject parcel.
Got it. All right. Thank you.
Further comments or questions? Is the applicant present? Yes. Would you care to comment this evening? No comment. Okay. Very well. Anyone else wishing to comment on these items? Seeing none. I will, as I did the last time, I will see if there is a motion related to these 3 items. If not, then I will move towards either consent or...
Thank you. I feel like being consistent, so I will move ahead to vote on 2023-23, 2023-24, and 2023-25.
Very well. Motion's been made for the approval of, with boxes checked, I think.
With the box check.
See, I'm not the only one that makes that mistake.
Well, throwing all these curveballs today. Yeah.
It's a tough life. Motion's been made for the approval of 2023, 23, 24, and 25 with the box approved, checked. Discussion. Seeing none, you're recognized to close.
I close.
Please call the roll.
Commissioner Wagner.
Aye.
Commissioner Withington.
Yes.
Commissioner Lawson. Yes. Commissioner Carpenter.
Yes.
Commissioner Thompson.
Yes.
Commissioner Johnson.
Yes.
Very well. That moves us right along to 2023, 26, and 27, which are also companion issues. Administrator?
Resolution 2023-26 and Resolution 2023-27 are companion resolutions for the zoning and final plat for Lot 11 of Waterfall Manor subdivision, and Director Jones is here to provide information.
Please proceed.
Kip Jones, Planning and Zoning Manager. So this one's a unique case as well. So to give you a little history on this case, this plat was recorded in 1970, and everything shaded in orange was Lot 11 of Waterfall Manor. So it was approximately 10 and a half acres. The unique thing about this is right after that plat was recorded in the same year, in October, the developer decided to divide this again by deed. And for whatever reason, they did not replat this lot. So you can see there's two houses on the 10 and a half acres. That's what the yellow is showing. And in 1970, after the plat was recorded, they recorded those deeds that created those two lots there. To do that properly, you should file a replat. But for whatever reason, that was never done. The properties have changed hands. The developer does not own the either subject property, and so the current owners had nothing to do with that error that happened. So the proposed plat would correct that error. In combination with that, we would rezone it to our current zoning standard, which would be R5 with the agricultural land preservation. And we're just platting this lot that's shaded now. So the lot to the north is not part of the plat. They have chose not to replat at this point. The Land Development Code says if a parcel is not subdivided correctly through our process, then our enforcement for those parcels is we do not give out building permits on those parcels until it's corrected. So this came up because this property owner wanted to pull a building permit for an accessory building. It was flagged in our system, and that kicked in the need to replat. So once we approve this replat, that issue will be resolved, and they'll be able to get their building permit. So here's the surrounding area. The subject parcel, that's Liberty city limits to the west. That is 84th Street, which is Richfield, turns into 84th, and 84th turns into Missouri City Road. Again, the comp plan, rural low density tier. Again, that tier says a 5+ acre lot is okay. That's what we're creating here, even though it got created in 1970 technically. Same rezoning criteria that we think have been addressed. No concerns expressed leading up to or during the Planning and Zoning Commission meeting. This followed our same process. We sent 24 certified letters, and the Planning and Zoning Commission voted to approve with one condition. The applicant has agreed to that condition. The applicant lives out of state. They did attend the Planning and Zoning Commission meeting, but were unable to get back for the County Commission meeting today. But I am happy to answer any questions that the Commission has.
Questions of Mr. Jones? Very well. I'll just ask, it seems like this is a bit of a housekeeping kind of a thing as much as anything. Is my characterization reasonable?
Yes, we're really just correcting an error that occurred in October of 1970.
Right, so this sounds like it is qualitatively different from what we've been dealing with up to this point.
Yeah, very unique case for sure.
Very good. Is there a motion related to 2023, 26, and 27? Commissioner Lawson.
To check the box.
Oh, go ahead and hit your button so you're on. There we go.
I'm sorry. I'll make a motion to check the box and approve Waterfall Manor 2023, 26, and 27 on through for approval.
With the box check for approved.
Pardon?
Box check to approve.
Yes, I said that. Yeah, box
Yeah.
check.
So, motion's been made for the approval of 2023, 26, and 27 with the box approved, checked. Further discussion? Seeing none, you're recognized to close.
Oh, close.
You're recognized to close, you can say I close if you want. Or if you want to make a closing remark, you can, or you can just say I close.
Close.
Okay, no, I couldn't hear you.
Oh, okay, I'm sorry.
Okay, very well, call the roll.
Commissioner Lawson,
Yes.
Commissioner Withington,
Yes.
Commissioner Wagner,
Aye.
Commissioner Carpenter,
Yes.
Commissioner Thompson,
Yes.
Commissioner Johnson.
Yes.
Very well, that brings us to 2023-07. Administrator?
Resolution 2023-07 is approving the ARPA project for fee booth replacements in the amount not to exceed $185,000, and Director Driscoll is here to provide information to the commission.
Please proceed.
Good afternoon, Mike Driscoll, Clay County Parks Director. This resolution asks for the approval of the ARPA funds to replace 5 of the original fee booths that were built way back probably in the early 80s there at the project at Smithville Lake. We have basically found a design of a CXT structure that fits our purposes and should be a lasting improvement to the entrance to these fee collection areas, which are boat ramps, and they're at the Camp Branch office and marina area, Sailboat Cove, both boat ramps, W and Crows Creek, and also out in the picnic arm of the Crows Creek area. The only fee booth that is not being replaced is the one at the entrance to Little Platte, where we rebuilt that not recently, but a few years back, and it's still very much good shape and serves its purpose.
Okay. Questions or comments? Do I see any hands? No? All right, very well. Is there anyone else wishing to speak on this subject? Seeing none. I'm assuming we will, unless there's a motion, then I would recommend that we put 2023-07 on for regular agenda, unless there's a motion to approve it tonight.
Great. I just have a question. I'm not going to
Commissioner Johnson, go right ahead.
So I won't make a motion on this one, but the same question I have is the same thing. Why do we make staff wait for another week before they can get moving on things? If there's not going to be an objection from any of us to any of this, or if it doesn't look like there's anything that would, I mean, consent is we're just going to approve it next week.
It's not, the issue before for consensus from the commission was to put it on regular agenda. I'm sorry.
Right. This is, guys, I guess my blanket statement for all of these kinds of things, that if we can do them now, why, if we don't have a reason to wait, why don't we do them? And I'm just throwing that out there, and like Commissioner Carpenter said, maybe we need to have a broader discussion, but that discussion has to take place in the public's view. It can't take place in private for all of us to talk about it. So at some point, we need to have that, because I don't like making staff wait to get their job done.
I'll go ahead and give you my opinion, and certainly anyone else wants to weigh in. This is my take on it is we are dealing with taxpayer money, and we need to take that responsibility very seriously. I think when I weigh the considerations of if staff needed it right away, they would have requested and they would have provided reason, as did the prosecuting attorney in a previous issue. We're talking about when we're talking about whether it should be for the convenience of staff or whether it should be for watchdogging taxpayer money, I fall on the side of saying we should be cautious with taxpayer money.
I agree, but this agenda and this information has been out in the public for how long?
The agenda was posted Friday.
Okay, so they've had several days to see this, and has anybody heard any objections to any of this? I guess what I'm saying is we can always err on the side of caution, but sometimes too much on the side of caution, it just slows things down. And that's why I think we need to really take a look at how is the county government working, and what can we do to be more user-friendly, not only to the community, but to our own staff who are trying to get things done. And I say this because I've been on that side. I've been on that side of staff most of my career, and I got so frustrated when it had to wait for a council or commission to decide something. And they're not going to meet again for another couple of weeks, so we got to wait another couple of weeks. Well, this is a no-brainer. And so that's really my concern. Again, if somebody wants to make a motion, I will. I won't cause any more ruffles here, but that's really my concern. That's something I think we really need to think about. Is like, I get the taxpayer. I'm a fiscal conservative who's all about the taxpayer's money. But nothing's going to change on this. Nothing's going to change. If there's no objections here, nothing. Let's face it. No one's going to think another thought about this until next week when we approve it on consent. That's what's going to happen, and that's what happens.
It would be on regular.
Okay.
I'm sorry, I didn't mean to correct you, but I didn't want you to get down the wrong path. Before we go further in this discussion, Mr. Counselor, can you give us what the procedure would be if a commissioner wished to have this considered for this evening? how would we go about that, particularly seeing as there's not a request for immediate action on this one? What would be the procedure for a commissioner who would like to move forward on this issue this evening?
It's just quite simply a motion to approve, with the understanding of all commissioners that it has to be unanimous.
Very good. Is there a motion for the approval of 2023-07? Oh, I'm sorry, please. Go ahead, Commissioner Wagner.
Thank you. Although I do understand the desire to move things forward quickly, having been on this side for other matters for another jurisdiction, it is surprising when you hear there is an objection to something. And I would just caution us as there is a desire to accelerate things and get people in doing the work that everyone wants done. There's another side of that says, well, if you go to Clay County, things can just happen like that before anyone even realizes what you did. And I get that people have had a few days to see this, but unless we're really sure of where that line is drawn, I was okay doing it for citizens for basically property they already owned. I mean, it was theirs. They've been through a process, public one, before it ever came here. These items are coming in front of the public for the first time. And even though they may seem pretty inert and really easy to say, yeah, that's fine, there is something to be said for people to have the opportunity to see something more than once publicly. And until we are very clear as to where we want to draw that line, I'm a little bit nervous to think that, well, everybody thinks it's okay, therefore it's okay. Like this one, this seems okay. We could do it now. But I think today I would just as soon say, you know, we've made a few moves that I think are a little atypical, if I understand our colleagues and their reactions. Your point is well taken, but I also feel like I should say sometimes it's okay for it to be seen a couple times so people know what we're doing. And I'll just leave it at that.
Administrator, did you wish to weigh in on this?
Just a point of clarification, especially for the new commissioners. So many of the projects that will be coming before you that are ARPA projects, they have already received project authorization and been before the commission to do project authorization to use ARPA funding for that particular project. This one is coming back before the commission because we have the vendor, and so you're authorizing the project. So a couple of items down, you'll actually see us bring forward to you a new project under ARPA funding request for project authorization. So I'm not saying one way or the other to approve it tonight or not. I'm simply just clarifying many of the ARPA projects you will be approving the contracts for have actually been before the commission actually a couple of times when we were talking about ARPA funding.
Commissioner Wagner.
So then I can't resist asking then, because then I begin to see very clearly the question, because if the project has already been authorized, is there a reason why the authorization and the contract cannot be done at the same time?
That's not our normal practice. So
Well, we've blown that up today.
Well,
so.
yeah, so we're just, charting a new course here. But we actually charted a new course when we did project authorization because it was ARPA funding. So when we came to the commission to talk about all the ARPA funding and all the project needs that the county had. So that's why we got project authorization. And so when the commission sort of blessed the project and gave us authorization, then staff went out to finalize contracts, what do those projects look like, and brings it back to the commission one more time. That is not our normal practice.
Well, last thing I'll just say, and I appreciate the opportunity, is when it does have to do with contracts, I do feel like contracts kind of lend themselves to a little extra time because we don't want to be accused of just kind of ramming a contract through. But I guess I do think whenever, and I kind of get why you've taken the approach you have, but I guess to the question that's posed, to the extent that we can eliminate steps in the process where we can do the allocations and the contracts at the same time, to me, because again, it's been a while since that earlier discussion has been had, and I think for most members of the public, they're not keeping score and remembering, oh yeah, you did that, 3 months ago. I'll just suggest, to the extent that those authorizations and contracts can come together in a single action, that would make a lot more sense to me, and maybe speaks to some of the issues our colleague has spoken to. So, thank you.
Yes, Commissioner Lawson.
The only thing I was wondering about, and maybe I missed something, but I thought that when we did our initial budget look-through, these were some of the things that we were talking about, improvements that needed to be made and that we were looking forward to making. Didn't we discuss those when we did Parks and Rec? I thought that we had talked about both of these issues. I may be wrong. I've been wrong before, but I just don't see, I kind of feel the same way that Jay does. With something like this, we've talked about fee booth replacement, we've talked about restroom replacement, I've heard it. And I think we just need to proceed so they can get going on it and get it all taken care of before the spring rush hits. I don't see a reason for holding on these two items.
No, I appreciate that comment. One of the reasons that it resonates with me was during a past commission, the suggestion was made, once we pass the budget, it is no longer the business of the commission to oversee expenditures. I didn't agree with that particular assessment of how we go forward. I realize I'm being rather subjective here, but that feels a little bit like where we're going with this. I would like to think of myself as a fiscal conservative, at least to the degree that we watch out for taxpayer money. I think cutting steps where we are watchdogging what the people's money is being spent for is not. I would rather err on the side of being more cautious with the taxpayer money. Could we do this? Yes. Should we do this? Quite honestly, I don't know, maybe. But what I do feel pretty strongly about is we're talking about now a policy change that would actually affect the expenditure of taxpayer money that is not for the convenience of the citizens, but for the convenience of the government. And I think those kinds of policy changes should be the subject of discussion and input from all commissioners, with the ability for those commissioners to give some thought to how that policy change should take place. Otherwise, I mean, how many more policies do we care to change this evening?
You want a number?
Yes.
I'm just kidding. So how do we do that? How do we have that conversation?
Bring it up for discussion. We bring it up for discussion. We discuss it. We get input from staff, and we give them instruction during that discussion on what we think the commission should do. They propose a course of action, and then we make changes. Not unlike what Mr. Jones had talked about, was they were constructing policy changes to, in fact, address that issue. If we want to address this issue, the best thing to do is to give all commissioners notice so that they can discuss those. And then we can come to a consensus rather than just pushing it through spontaneously.
Does that mean like agendize something, a discussion, or?
It would be, if we cared to pursue this, a commissioner is certainly free to put that on discussion items on our agenda. If you look at your agenda, it'd be number 8.
Right.
So those kinds of issues can be put before the commission. The commission can then have the ability to prepare and actually discuss this in a way that is not blindsiding anybody. Then we can come to some conclusions as far as what might be an appropriate and what might not be an appropriate streamlining of our positions. Commissioner Wagner.
Thank you. I may also offer another alternative, as the county administrator has mentioned on several occasions that she would like to get this body together in a work session to talk exactly about these sorts of issues as well as other policy issues. And I may suggest to the group that whenever that date is set, that we take advantage of that opportunity, because then I think you can throw around these various ideas, and I've provided her more paper than she wants on things that I have, and I've shared with some of you. So I would offer the alternative that work session, I believe, is specifically to be able to get through issues like these, so there are fewer surprises for her down the road, but all these are wonderful surprises, I know, but I don't know if you want to speak to when that may occur?
I'm happy to speak about that. I think we've had conversations before the new commission members took office about talking about having a work session, a strategic planning session. And part of that will be about you all getting together and working as a team. Part of it will be about what are operational issues like this that you would like to give and have further discussion and have that open dialogue. And then staff would come back at a later date with some proposals for you. And the third part of that particular is a strategic planning. So it's more bigger picture, it's more visionary, it's more goals and objectives. And so our goal is to have that sometime in probably March and set some dates. And we'll talk about March a little bit here later on in the agenda about March meetings, because we also know that spring break in that month. But so that's kind of the strategy. It's probably going to be 2 days worth of lots of dialogue, lots of discussion, and setting out goals to accomplish. So this could happen then.
I would just comment also that that has the added ability to understand how those interact with one another, so that when we come up with whatever were changes or reforms, they come in as a package and they in fact have a degree of consistency with one another, and it forwards the process a little bit more easily rather than do them piecemeal on the spot.
And if I could just add one more item. So as Commissioner Nolte mentioned, there is a discussion item, item number 8 on the agenda. And so again, just to remind commissioners, if there is ever a topic that you want listed from a discussion item on an agenda, simply just reach out to me. We'll schedule a date that works for all of you for, let's say, the sponsor. Definitely, and we'll get that on the face of the agenda and, basically ensure that allocate that you have time to have that open dialogue and discussion on whatever that topic is.
Commissioner Withington.
Is staff asking for this to be on immediate action because for 2023-07 box, no and yes are both checked. On 2023, 8 and 9, only no is checked.
I'm sorry, would you repeat that one more time? I didn't quite.
I was asking if staff was asking that 2023-07 be considered for an immediate action because both boxes yes and no are checked, but on 2023-08 and 09 only no is checked.
I would say that is a typographical error.
I just wanted to confirm. Yeah.
Okay. Further discussion on 2023-07, or at least the procedural, because we'd kind of gotten into, and I believe it's in order to talk about the procedure of how we would adjudicate 2023-07. Is there any further comment or question to be made? Okay, seeing that, given the nature of the discussion we just had, is there a motion on 2023-07, or shall we go forward with a consensus view of either regular or consent agenda? Is there a motion?
I'll make a motion, check the box, correct? And we go ahead and move forward on 2023-07.
Motion has been made for the approval of 2023-07 with the box approved checked. Discussion.
There's no box on this one.
Oh, there's no box on there? I'm sorry, I
It's
got,
just for approval.
sorry about that. Commissioner Wagner.
Thank you. As I said earlier, these and the rest of these, I'm going to vote no to vote on them today simply because they're contracts, they're ours, and until we have a better idea of what it is we are looking for as far as direction, I am very nervous just doing this as a one and done. And it is not a commentary on the project. It's not a commentary on the department. It's just I'm gonna just kind of pump the brakes a little bit because I feel when it's taxpayer money, that's a little different deal, and that can change later. But that's kind of where I'm at today. So,
Further comment on the issue before us?
Commissioner,
Commissioner
thank you.
Carpenter, did you have something?
Thank you. What I'll just say is I think it's a perfectly valid discussion in terms of do we do things the day we hear it and vote it the same day, or do we wait a week? Perfectly reasonable conversation to be had. Under current ordinance, our procedure says we wait a week. So until maybe somebody offers an ordinance to change our procedure and have us hear things and vote them the same day, should we adopt that as a new ordinance? That seems, like I said, a perfectly reasonable conversation to have. Sure, there are pros and cons on both sides of it, but currently our procedure says we wait a week after we hear an item. I think we ought to follow that ordinance. So I'm going to join Commissioner Wagner in voting no.
Further comments? Very well. With that, Commissioner Lawson, you're recognized to close, or you can withdraw the amendment if you so choose. Excuse me, the motion.
Let's just go ahead and amend it and just put it on to the next week's.
Yeah, I'm sorry, I used amend and I used the wrong word. So you can withdraw the motion if you so choose.
I can't hear you.
You can withdraw the motion if you so choose, or you can go for a vote, whichever you please.
We got 2 no's, so I'm going to go ahead and just say, rather than putting through it, let's just go ahead and say that I'm going to rescind my motion
Okay,
and we'll proceed.
very well. Motion has been removed, therefore it brings us back to 2023-07. As this does involve the expenditure of money, my recommendation is to put it on regular, which has been our general practice. Obviously, if a commissioner wants to put it on consent, I'm not sure how that impacts things, but is there any objection to putting it on regular agenda for our next meeting? And I remind you that this is a consensus thing, so we're not voting, but I'm just trying to get a sense of the majority of the commission. So, are there any objections to regular agenda for next week of this item? Very well. With that, 2023-07 will be on next week's regular agenda. That brings us to 2023-08, Administrator.
Resolution 2023-08 is approving ARPA funding for 7 CXT restroom replacements in the park system, and Director Driscoll is here to provide information.
Please proceed.
Mike Driscoll, Clay County Parks Director. This resolution asks for the approval of funds to purchase CXT restroom buildings for replacement in the parks. 2 at Tris Falls are old wooden structures that have been there since, I think, about 2007. One, also a flush restroom, was burnt down prior to 2007 in Crows Creek, and we would like to put that structure back up with a new CXT. 2 of these would be at Rocky Hollow. These would be vault toilets that we would put at the lake area there at Rocky Hollow Park, which currently has portable restrooms as the only facilities there. And the other 2, the main part of this, are shower and restroom facilities that are really needed badly in the park, one for Little Platte and one at Kelsey Short. These structures, if you don't know the CXT structures, they're an all-concrete structure, ADA compliant, pretty much vandal-proof. They are rated for up to 150-mile-an-hour wind gusts and can really help as a storm shelter in times of need out in the park.
Well, that's good to know that they can double as a storm shelter, because that's obviously at the moment though that is needed. It's certainly a welcome thing to have. With that, are there any questions of the? No questions. Anyone else wishing to comment? Seeing none, unless there is a motion, I would recommend that we put this on regular agenda for next week. Is that the consensus of the commission? Very well. So 2023-08 will be on next week's regular agenda. That brings us to 2023-09. Administrator.
Resolution 2023-09 is approving an ARPA project authorization for a chiller replacement for the administration building. This is coming from facilities, and I am pitch hitting for Deputy County Administrator Coons, who is unable to be here this evening. So this is a little bit different than what we've talked about. So this has not been presented to the commissioners. And so what we're requesting is ARPA authorization, and we will come back to the commission should you approve this evening for authorization for a contract award. This is to replace the chiller here in the administration building. This particular equipment was put in 1985. In essence, what it simply does is provides cool water that basically feeds the air conditioning of this particular building. If we do not replace the chiller, we have no air conditioning in the administration building coming this spring and summer. The windows in this building do not open. And so I will tell you that air conditioning is pretty important in this building in the summertime. The estimated cost of this project is $355,000 to replace the chiller and the equipment. And this would come from lost revenue out of the ARPA funding. The current equipment, the life expectancy is typically 20 to 30 years, and we've certainly exceeded that with this particular equipment. And so staff is recommending approval of project authorization so that we can start and replace the chillers before summer hits.
And just to clarify, what you're requesting is that we have a vote this evening to authorize going forward with this?
Right, so all you're simply doing is you're authorizing us to reserve those ARPA funds in the lost revenue category to pay for this particular project. We do not have funding in our facilities budget for $355,000 replacement. And so, yes, you would be approving that. We'll come forward. We'll come back to the commission for a contract award.
Right, so we will be able to revisit this. So we're just saying, yeah, go check it out, essentially.
Yeah.
Comments or questions from other commissioners? Commissioner Wagner.
Two quick ones. One, when do we expect, or when do we expect responses to an RFP on this? And then secondly, if I remember right, since this is the first time we've seen this, this would actually drop our, for lack of a better term, ARPA reserve from around 900,000 to, if this is a correct estimate, somewhere around 550-ish?
Correct.
Okay.
Correct. And I believe staff has already been out getting quotes to replace the chiller, which is why we're comfortable with the $355,000. So if you give us this authorization this evening, you will see us come back to you very quickly to award the contract.
All right, thank you.
I did have a follow-up question, and that is, I think it's a pretty reasonable expectation that this being modern equipment, we will see some degree of efficiency and some savings, hopefully, on the cost of our utilities. Is that, and I realize quantifying that might be difficult, but is that a reasonable expectation?
Well, I think anytime that you replace equipment that is, 30, 40 years old, that you will see efficiencies, but I've not been presented any numbers on what we anticipate that will be. I think what you might find is we might have better temperature control in this building.
Well, certainly, we're all going to appreciate air conditioning later on this year. Did anyone else have any questions or comments they wish to make? Very well. With that, is there a motion on 2023-09?
Move to approve and authorize 2023-09.
Motion, excuse me, motion's been made for the approval of 2023-09. Further discussion? Seeing none, please call the roll.
Commissioner Wagner,
Aye.
Commissioner Withington,
Yes.
Commissioner Lawson. Yes. Commissioner Carpenter.
Yes.
Commissioner Thompson,
Yes.
Commissioner Johnson.
Yes.
That brings us to the final item on our regular agenda this afternoon. That is 2023-28. Administrator?
Resolution 2023-28 is approval of an RFP 54-22, a term and supply contract with U.S. Corrections LLC for inmate transportation services. And Captain Agdarian is here to provide information to the commission.
Please proceed.
Good afternoon, Commissioners. Captain Amy Agdarian, Clay County Sheriff's Office, Fiscal Services Division. This is a request for approval of a term and supply contract with U.S. Corrections, which is going to be a vendor that we could contract with to do prisoner transports. We had previously had a contract with this vendor for the last couple of years, but earlier last year, they were purchased by another company, lost their GSA contract, and then we could no longer utilize them without going out to bid. So working with purchasing, the sheriff's office personnel got together the specifications, put it out to bid, and this was the lowest and best option for the sheriff's office.
So you have contracted for this work before. What my question was going to be, how would adopting this, if it any effect would it have on your personnel, the number of worker hours that have to be put in? Does this affect that in any way?
Well, the reason that we have used this vendor in the past is that we have noticed that post-COVID, there has been a surge in the number of out-of-state prisoner transports that we do, or extraditions. And previously, the Fugitive Apprehension Unit was primarily responsible for this. But in order to maximize some personnel, we have combined into this transport team that we currently have, staffed with 6, but working in pairs. This transport team cannot handle all of the out-of-state extraditions as well as the in-state transfers and working with the municipalities. So we want to have the option of this vendor as, I wouldn't call it a last resort, but I would call it an option, especially if you have a situation where you've got transport teams that are working back-to-back extraditions, and, I mean, they need days off. So, you know, in order to keep fresh personnel in the field, this is a good option for us. Additionally, this company allows transport of some special cases inmates. For instance, we recently had a prisoner that had a medical condition involving blood clots, and that person needed to be able to get up and move around about every 45 minutes or so. And this company was better able to make that transport than our personnel are. So, and just so that you know, this company, I mean, as the same as with our transport personnel, these costs are reimbursed to the county. So even though this vendor, it's going to cost a little bit more than if our personnel did these transfers, but it's still reimbursed back to the county.
Well, actually, my question was, I think you've kind of answered, but just to clarify is, this would supplement the efforts the Sheriff Department is making, not replace them?
No, this is not to supplant. This is a supplement to our current personnel.
That was kind of the, that was sort of the, and I probably asked it poorly, but that was
Actually,
the
that was
question.
my first note, and I didn't lead with that, so thank you.
That's okay. The thing is, I think I have at least a reasonable appreciation that inmate detainee transports is highly dangerous and very problematic, and that's something that whenever this subject comes up, I have in mind some of the tragedies that have happened in our area. So that's usually my first go-to thought is the danger that it places the transporting officers in. So that was kind of where I was going with that. Is there, so this is reimbursed, so it really is going to be, as far as what we pay them, is it 100% reimbursable or is it partially reimbursed?
It's my understanding it's 100% reimbursable. They are functioning just like our personnel are. And when I mentioned that this is lowest and best, one of the reasons that we preferred this company was because their services most closely mirror what the transport would look like if our own personnel were doing them. Gotcha. And, you know, they have to abide by, you know, DOT regulations and federal guidelines. So it's very much as though our own people are doing it, but it allows our people some rest. And if we get into a situation where, let me just say this, last year we did 241 of these. I'm sorry, it might have been 243. 241 extraditions last year, okay? And in addition to the extraditions, all of the other transports that this team is having to do, it may be a situation where time dictates that we have to get this inmate picked up. That's when we could look to this company and say, hey, we're in a pinch, we need to hire you.
And that was kind of, the other question was, what was the criteria, whether it would be to relieve the overload on your officers, or whether when you had specific needs, as you indicated, the person who was susceptible to blood clots, whether you would use this particular vendor in the event that you had a specialized need. And quite honestly, again, the first thing that popped into my mind, while we need to accommodate the medical needs of the people being transferred, allowing that person to exit the vehicle and to exercise or do whatever enhances the risk involved for our officers, and that's where my first concern went. Questions or comments? Commissioner Johnson.
Just one question. You mentioned extraditions. Besides extraditions, what other kind of transports are they doing?
Okay, so we are, hold on, I have that very information for you. So we're going to be doing not only the extraditions out of state, but you've got in-state pickups around the state for extraditable warrants out of Clay County, all over the state. You've got pen trips where we're running inmates down to Department of Corrections, so they've been sentenced, or if they're here on writs, we're returning them to DOC.
So just so you don't have to list all these,
Thank you.
are they all just custody facilities to custody facilities? Are they going to be doing transports in the field, picking up for deputies and transporting for them, or that kind of stuff?
No, our field deputies, if they make an arrest out in the field, they bring their people into the detention center themselves. Yeah.
Any other commissioners have any comments or questions? I just one other one. So what would be, and I shame on me for not having located it right away, what would be the, once it is signed, once it is approved, what is the start date on this contract? When would they begin their services, or would it be within X number of days after signing the document?
I think once they're available to us, it's not like I mean, you can see this wasn't put on for immediate action.
Right.
We just need to make sure that we have this vendor in our hip pocket, if you will,
Okay, so
or
really-
available to us as a tool. But here's the other thing. This has been pending for months. We had to go back and forth between their attorneys and our attorneys to make sure that everything was appropriate for both parties.
So once again, my question was if there was a specific start date, or is it upon approval?
It's upon
Because some
approval.
contracts would say starting February 1st. That was the question.
Upon approval.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Before we go to the sheriff, any other questions? Mr. Sheriff, do you have something you'd like to say?
Will Aiken, Sheriff of Clay County. Captain Agdarian has done a wonderful job representing the sheriff's office in this matter. But to your question, Commissioner Nolte, we actually have an incident that just came up where we have to go to Anchorage, Alaska to pick someone up. And so we're not going to send our deputies up there. We can send this company up there. They're available to us as soon as it's approved. And rather than sending our personnel over there to pick this person up, we can send that company. And it's all reimbursable.
The point of my question was to see when you needed this done. So if you had a request on early approval, I was trying to set you up to make that a request.
So I'd like
if
to
you
make a
so
request for
chose.
early approval if we can, so we can use this company to go to Anchorage, Alaska.
Now, but obviously with some reason, because the other thing was if you had some other agreement that was going to end on a certain date, it makes no difference to have two vendors overlapping. So I was just trying to get that sort of clarified in my mind.
Yeah, there is no other vendor.
Okay.
This is the vendor that we would like to use. As Captain Agdarian said, the best option for us, and since we've used them in the past and we're familiar with them, as soon as it's approved, which if we can approve that today, that'd be great, because then we can send this company to Alaska instead of sending our personnel, because we do have a time frame before we have to respond.
I was trying to define what urgency may be in play, and since you're the expert, that was why I was asking that question. Further comments or questions of the sheriff? Seeing none. I will then, since we are on regular agenda, are we wanting a motion on this for today, or are we going to want to put it on a regular or consent agenda? Commissioner Wagner.
Thank you. I move for consideration of 2023-28 for today's agenda.
I'm sorry?
For today's agenda.
For today's agenda. Motion has been made to put 2023-28 on the agenda for today. I assume immediate action.
Correct.
Discussion? What the commissioner is doing, and correct me if I'm wrong, is putting it on for immediate action so then we can take it up to date? No, I've got that wrong.
We just need a motion to approve if you so choose.
Okay, very good. So yes, is another vote going to be required after this?
I heard that as a motion to approve, but.
So, well,
It sort of did, sort of didn't.
let me ask this because we've got a few like this. My understanding from the previous discussions were, if you ask for approval now and you have one person who says no, then you've just struck it, as opposed to saying, vote now to consider this for action today.
No, if you make a motion today to approve, it can be approved if one commissioner or 5 commissioners vote against approving it today, it simply goes to next week's agenda.
Well, then I will just amend my motion to approve 2023-28 today.
Thank you. I apologize, but I want to make sure procedurally we were going in the correct direction. Motion's been made for the approval of 2023-28, and I am looking to see if I don't believe there are any boxes to be checked.
No.
Very good. I want to double check.
Just what lines that needed to be filled in, but I'll leave that up to the captain.
Yeah. No, I made that mistake on the box checking thing before. I'm trying not to make it too often. Very good. Motion's been made for the approval of 2023-28. Discussion. Commissioner Carpenter.
I'd just very briefly say I support the motion to pass it today. And just so everybody, it seems like there's sort of some confusion here, which is we've got an ordinance about our procedures, which is that we hear something one week, we vote on it the next week. There is an exception allowed in place that if there is reason that it needs to happen right away, which occasionally happens, then via unanimous vote, we can do that, which is, I think, what we're about to do. In this case, the exception is our good Sheriff Aiken, has said that we've got, an immediate transfer that would be beneficial to do it right away rather than to wait. And so by unanimous vote, we can choose to do that. I think there's good reason to do it, so I'm going to choose to engage in an exception and vote it out today, and I support the motion. Thanks.
Further discussion? I just want to say, that was the point behind asking the questions about dates, times, because I wanted to establish whether or not there was a timeliness that was required, and that was, quite honestly, a leading question. I was trying to get you to say, yes, there is a timeliness issue so that we could, in fact, as Commissioner Carpenter pointed out, stay within our rules for consistency, that there was a compelling reason to vote on it for approval this evening. With that, I see no other comments to be made. You're recognized to close.
I close.
Please call the roll.
Commissioner Wagner.
Aye.
Commissioner Withington.
Yes.
Commissioner Lawson. Yes. Commissioner Carpenter.
Yes.
Commissioner Thompson.
Yes.
Commissioner Johnson.
Yes.
That brings us to the end of our regular agenda. I will entertain, I'm sorry? Yeah, we will. Oh, yes. I will entertain a motion to dispose of those items on our regular agenda that have been indicated either for regular or consent agenda for next week. And then after that, we will stand at ease for a few moments since we've been going at this for almost 2 hours. Is there a motion? Commissioner Wagner.
Thank you. I move to place 2023-13, 2023-14, 2023-07, 2023-08 on the regular agenda. And if I'm not mistaken, all other items have been dealt with.
So yes, nothing would go on. We would not have a consent agenda for next week as of this moment.
Right, so yes, correct.
Very well. Motion's been made to put on the regular agenda for next week items indicated by the commissioner. Is there any discussion? Seeing none, you're recognized to close.
I close.
Please call the roll.
Commissioner Wagner.
Aye.
Commissioner Withington.
Yes.
Commissioner Lawson. Yes. Commissioner Carpenter.
Yes.
Commissioner Thompson.
Yes.
Commissioner Johnson.
Yes.
That concludes we have dealt with the regular agenda. We have a discussion item, which I suspect might take some time. And as we've been going at it for almost 2 hours now, we will stand at ease and come back, let's say no earlier than 5 o'clock. I'd like to do as close to 5 as possible, but let's be reasonable on what we're doing here. So we will reconvene slightly after 5 o'clock. We will return from standing down for a few moments, and now we will resume our meeting. And next on the agenda would be item number 8, discussion items. There is one item under that heading. Administrator, I believe that would be yours.
Yes, it is. Thank you very much, Commissioners. So this evening, we're here to talk about the 2023 proposed budget and some proposed adjustments to the proposed budget. So the agenda for this evening is to talk about what we would consider housekeeping items that we are recommending to make adjustments to the proposed budget. We're also going to review, based on last week's conversation about salaries for the sheriff's office, what those options are, and we will press you to make a decision this evening and give staff direction. Also want to have an opportunity for you all to discuss any other proposed budget adjustments that you may have, and then we'll kind of briefly go over the budget schedule, which there's not much time left with the budget schedule. So with that, I'll start off with the housekeeping items. And earlier, you did receive a correspondence from me along with a detailed memo that talked about each one of the, what we would consider housekeeping adjustments to the proposed budget, along with even a detailed spreadsheet provided by our budget team. So I'm going to kind of group them together. So one of the most significant number of the proposed adjustments for you is basically what I would consider it a reconciliation. Now that we have closed, or we're getting ready to close 2022. So it gives us an opportunity to true up what we believe the cash balances are, the unaudited cash balances in the various funds. And so there were changes to those in what we had put in the proposed budget when we were estimating several months ago. Versus what the reality is now that we have actually gone through the month of December. And so, you know, items 1 and 4, 5, 6, and 7 are somewhat related to basically truing up now that we're at the end of the year. So many of those are cash carryover in various funds, and there are 2 others that are really true-ups, and that has to do with the ARPA funding and the ARPA fund and also the bond fund. Because again, we put an estimate together several months ago, and depending on what cash outlay has actually occurred on those projects that have been approved, so we're just truing up those numbers. The other one would be items 2 and 3 that are somewhat grouped together. So as you all know, we've done a resurfacing project of the runway out at the airport. It was a $4 million project. 90% of that was coming from the state. Unfortunately, you know, December came and we had not received all our reimbursement yet from the state. And so we then, as accounting rules, you know, you show that as an accounts receivable. When you do that, that also then will eventually increase the money available in the general fund. And then pursuant to state statute when it comes to that 3% of contingency reserve, we then had to increase that number from what's in the proposed budget to what it needs to be based on that to ensure that we are in compliance with state statute. The last items, 8, 9, and 10, are really just kind of our recommendations for some miscellaneous changes of things that we have heard, the budget team has heard, in working with departments, some minor changes. One, as you will recall, is the commission did approve the intergovernmental agreement on replica with all the other agencies. But the way that has to work is the county has to pay 100% of that contract and then get reimbursed back. So we have to adjust the line item budget so that you have the money in the account to pay the full contract and then reimburse ourselves. The other item is a request that we had heard from the Sheriff's Department. Really, it's about just transferring funds that at the time when we put the proposed budget together, hadn't realized the amount that they wanted to transfer from different funds. And then we also just have some miscellaneous minor salary budget adjustments for salaries of people that have moved around, been promoted, different things that have happened since the time we put the proposed budget together to the end of the year. And then the last items are then certainly what we're here probably to talk more about tonight, which is the increased sheriff personnel budget above what is in the proposed budget and the corresponding transfers. So if you're tying this to the memo and if you're tying this to the Excel spreadsheet, it's either items 11 and 12, depending on the funding that the commission directs us to do, or it's item 13 and 14 on that information. So I will stop there before we get into discussion about the sheriff personnel budget and ask if you have any questions about items 1 through 10.
One thing I want to, it's more procedural than about the individual items. Would the preference be to proceed by either you taking each item individually or those that correspond with one another? And I assume what we're seeking is consensus for staff to go forward, not a vote? Is that my assumption?
Well, in many of these, there's really not a choice. I mean, cash carryover is going to be what cash carryover is, and so these are really more just accounting procedures so that we walk in with the adopted budget as close to reality as we can.
If you could then, because there are some, as you say, that are not necessarily negotiable, for lack of a better way to put it. My preference would be when we reach those that require some consensus from the commission, let us know that. I'm a little concerned because the main one I see is the last one that would require some kind of consensus instruction. But I would rather do those as we go along when they are necessary, so we're not working at the end of the evening, we're trying to remember what number 5 was.
Right.
But
So
are there any others really going to require?
there really aren't. 1 through 10 are really pretty much cut and dry and housekeeping issues that we
Okay.
simply need to do. So the really big topic for discussion is the sheriff's budget personnel.
So you're
And
requesting
that's
consensus on just one item?
Correct.
Or one group of items?
Correct.
11
correct.
through 14.
Depending on, we're asking for direction from you tonight, and we'll get into those a little bit more about what the options are. And so our goal is that you give us direction on which option you would like for us to implement. We will adjust that and bring that back in the budget that will be scheduled for adoption next week.
Good. I just want to make sure that we were proceeding in an orderly manner.
Yeah, but I wanted to stop with those housekeeping items that really are,
course.
just really truing things up to see if you had any specific questions that you wanted us to answer about those. But we tried to outline all of that in the memo as much as possible for you.
So I'll just let you kind of go through them, and then you can pause at whatever point if you want to see if there are any questions from the commission. We'll just work it that way it's a little more streamlined. Any other questions before we get started from the commission? Commissioner Withington.
Number 8, Replica, is that software that will be selling licensing, or the municipalities will be
Correct.
helping to pay? Okay.
Correct, that is, yeah. And
Yeah.
again, how that contract works is, it's the contract with the county, so we are obligated to pay the full annual amount of $48,000 that the commission has approved, and then we're allocating we're partnering with the municipalities. We've already invoiced them, because we've already received the invoice from Replica, so we've invoiced the municipalities, and so the county's cost of that in net is really about $6,000.
Yeah, I just couldn't remember what the name was, and then I saw it, and I just want, thank you.
Any other questions or comments? Seeing none,
Okay.
please proceed.
So the next item is to talk about continue the discussion that you all had last week regarding adjusting the sheriff's starting salary and existing personnel above what is in the current proposed budget. And so again, just to remind, what is in the proposed budget is to raise the starting salary to $45,000, and then also to address compression issues for all our existing personnel. At last week's meeting, there was a lot of discussion about, and we presented various options, anywhere from going from 45 to 48, to going to 50, to going to 52, to going to 55. Your direction to us last week was, let's take a look at 48 and 50 and what does that look like, and how would we make those things happen. So what I'd like to do is we've given you 3 options, and again, that was provided to you in correspondence over the weekend, to give you time to take a look at that information and ask us any questions. But what I'd like to do this evening is go through those 3 options, and then certainly answer questions, and that you all discuss and give us some direction on which option you would like to proceed with. So the first option is raising the starting salary from $45,000 to $48,000. And what that would do is, again, that would increase the starting salary, and that would also, again, on top of what we have in the proposed budget, we would come in and additionally to to that, all our existing personnel would see a $3,000 increase in their salary. The estimated cost for that, to implement that with the first full payroll in February, which is what is proposed in the budget all along for all employees for any kind of adjustment, is $548,795. Our recommendation for the funding for that in 2023 is to transfer additional money from the TIF fund, from the TIF reserves, into the various funds to cover that additional cost in personnel costs. Now, how that can be a sustainable funding, and as we talked last week, there are several TIFs that have just recently expired, one in Liberty and one in Kansas City. We have not had significant amount of opportunity to actually analyze the impact of that and what that will look like. However, to accommodate for the $550,000 for this project, in essence, we would reducing the amount of the transfer in the TIF fund from 10% to about 8%. That would happen in '24. So we certainly have all of '23 to continue analyzing the data of those two retired TIFs to see, but fairly confident that that is a sustainable revenue to fund this particular option. So the second option is to look at going to a $50,000 starting salary. And this is what I'm calling option one, because there are two options for the $50,000 starting salary. This would be a mid-year adjustment. And so in this particular plan, the $48,000 would go into effect with the first payroll in February, the amount, the $548 that we just talked about. And how we would sustain that and how we'd pay for that is that transfer that I just mentioned. We would recommend that we then review TIF revenues and expenditures and evaluate them and the ability to then fund the additional cost for the remainder of the year to raise the salaries at that point in time to a starting salary of $50,000, and also all existing personnel would then at that time receive a $2,000 increase into their wages to continue to ensure that we're not backpedaling on the compression that we've worked very hard on.
I'm sorry to interrupt. When you say existing employees, are you talking about existing sheriff's department employees, not
Yep,
employees of the county?
Correct. Thank you.
Thank
We're
you.
only talking about sheriff personnel, and I believe we're only talking about the sworn personnel.
Thank you.
Yes. Now, so we've estimated, because what we would be doing is going to 50 at a mid-year. So that's not the full cost, that's only a half a year. And so we've estimated that to be around $225,000 for the remainder of 2023. We're looking at possibly a July payroll to make that into effect. And so again, that is in essence then in '24, really going back to our forecast, that's about $1 million, right? While we're doing a two-step in '23, if we can do it in '24, it is the full-blown implementation. So it's about $1 million, which in essence is about a 3% reduction in the TIF transfer. So now we're going from 10% to 7%. Again, cautiously, we don't have enough data to tell you that we believe that 3% reduction is sustainable and that we can accomplish that. We'd like to have more data to take a look at that. It's still a little risky even in doing it mid-year because it's not a full year analysis of those retired TIFs. So one of the things that we put here is sort of, and I called it collateral because I didn't really know what else to call it, but in essence to basically identify a revenue source that we could set aside in reserve for 2024 should we, at the end of '23 in the preparation of the '24 budget, feel like we really couldn't sustain the additional increase. So what we're recommending there is to reduce the ARPA allocation for the Law Enforcement Resource Center down by $500,000. Because again, fairly comfortable that we can accommodate the $48,000 going forward. But going up to 50 is still a little unknown for us at this point in time. And if we do make it at mid-year, we'd still like to have some additional time to analyze that. And so kind of to protect the organization and our employees, if we make that change and increase that salary at mid-year, we'd like to ensure that we have those funds available for 2024. What that does do, if we don't feel that it's sustainable, it gives us another year to determine how are we going to, because there are bigger issues that we need to be talking about funding. So in essence, it's really just a protection for the organization and for employees, and that would be reducing the ARPA project for the Law Enforcement Center from 6.9 to basically 6.4. Depending on the timing of their project, we get, and we're doing 24's budget, and we feel like we don't need that, then that certainly can be reallocated back to the project. So depending on the schedule of their project, and we'd work with them on that to see how we can make that work for them. So if we don't need to spend it on this personnel cost for 24, then we certainly, would come back to you and recommend it could be put back to the project. So that's option one for $50,000 starting salary. And then option two is to basically raise the starting salary from the proposed budget of $45,000 to $50,000, starting with the first full payroll in February. And all existing commissioned staff in the Sheriff's Department would receive a $5,000 additional increase above the compression part. So again, maintaining that we've not, diluted the work that we've done on compression. Now that cost is $950,323. This is a riskier one. So we can fund it by transferring out of the TIF fund for 2023. But we do not know the sustainability of that with 2024 revenue. It's even more risky than doing a mid-year adjustment. So if that is the commission's pleasure, is to do that option, then we would recommend, again, sort of that protection financially for the organization and for the employees, that we would say we would recommend reducing the ARPA funding for the Law Enforcement Resource Center by $800,000. What that does is gives us above the 48 to fund that additional money for 24 and 25, give us a little bit longer breathing room to find revenue streams that can sustain this new plan. And we know, as the sheriff mentioned last week, one of the goals he's going to be working on is to come up with a pay structure and possibly talk about a step plan way before we get into the 24 budget. So we'd want to be working with him on that. But there's just so many unknowns at this point in time. And as you all have seen, our finances, we are not sitting on a lot of reserves. We also don't know what's going to happen with the economy, and we're still not sure just how much of a benefit we get from those TIFs that have paid off. So this is a much more riskier option to lead off with a $50,000 starting salary beginning in February. So we've given you several options, and certainly I'm going to stand for questions, and good luck. No.
I've got a couple.
Happy to answer questions.
I've got a couple, then I'll open it up to the other commissioners. One is, obviously, we've got a big county to run. Going forward with these options, just for the sake of argument, the last one, 50,000 now. What does that do to the prospects of our being able to extend pay increases to our other employees in other departments? Commissioner Carpenter raised the issue, and I think it was a valid and a poignant one, and that is we've got a lot of workers who we wish we could pay more to. By taking this money and diverting it that way, what does that do to the prospects of being able to give these other hard-working men and women an increase, keeping in mind that we are reaching a point now to where we're going to ask some folks to step into very big trucks and plow a lot of snow and ice at some point in the near future. I hope it's not too much, but the thing is, we've got people that we're asking to do a very hard job in various areas. So what does that do to the prospects of being able to extend them, I think, a reasonable increase in their pay?
Well, so I guess, so I'll step back a little bit and say, if this option is taken along with what else we're doing across the county in 2023 for all employees, that becomes the new base, right? Countywide. And so what that does is, the first thing we do when budget comes along for 24 or 25 or any year is you cover your base. And then the question becomes, what can you do to the new base each year depending on what the revenue stream is? So again, it will depend on, and just because we do this in 23, come 24, depending on revenue, we may not be in, I hope this is not the case, but depending on revenues, we may not be able to do any adjustments for anybody across the organization. This would become the new normal, but we have to at least plan that we can fund the new normal, the new base.
When you
So-
say base, are you talking about base for the sheriff's employees or bases for
all
everybody?
employees across the organization, right? Because as you know, what also is included in the pay plan is a restructuring in the prosecutor's office. We also have an 8% cost of living adjustment for all other personnel in the other departments. So once, whatever is approved in the '23 budget, that is the new base for personnel costs. And so when we start looking at the 2024 budget, you know, we cover the base and all the other needs and figure out what we can do for salaries. And that also includes what we can do for salaries in the sheriff's department too. So to answer your question, I don't know that I can tell you what it does. What I can say to you is, you know, one of the ways that we're looking at a sustainable revenue for this $1 million increase in personnel costs on top of what we already have in the budget is to utilize funds that we've been sitting across over into the TIF fund that we think we may not need. What that does do, though, is that basically allocates that additional new revenue, that freed up revenue that's not going to the TIF, to fund wages in the sheriff's department. So,
As opposed to funding raises for across the board.
or, you know, road projects or bridge projects or, you know, all sorts of different things. Because, you know, again, we now have a new financial obligation for a new base in personnel costs.
So that would be in effect dedicating any, maybe not any, but certainly this segment of TIF savings or TIF revenues to the sheriff's department exclusively, pretty much from here on out? I mean, by practice, if not by ordinance.
Well, on this particular one, if this is what the commission does, then in essence, we are obligating $1 million of additional revenue into the wages for the sheriff's department.
And should circumstances come about that 7% is no longer sufficient for whatever reason, new TIFs come online and there may be people shop at the brand new shiny TIF stores and they no longer shop at the ones that are now off of TIF, that revenue stream could be skewed somewhat. So, and there's no way to predict that. That's more art than science. I guess my question is, what happens if we discover that 7 isn't going to cut it and we need to have 7.5% to cover our obligations under TIF?
Well, then we'll be figuring out how we're going to make up the delta. But we have that challenge if a recession hits and our sales tax isn't hitting our projections. So it is something that we have to constantly monitor because, again, our main revenue stream is sales tax. And so, you know, that is very important to us to watch what is happening with consumers, what is consumer confidence, what's happening with recession. And so, you know, it could be a challenge because going to the TIF, instead of being 7%, it needs to be 8%. Well, that's something we're going to have to figure out. With regard to, you know, new TIFs, well, new TIFs will, you know, in essence, you do those because you believe they're bringing in new sales tax.
Right.
And so it is a percentage of new sales tax that we don't have. You mentioned, you know, your cost shifting. So people that shop in an area that is not in a TIF and they now go to an area that is a TIF, then there's lost revenue. You know, the theory is, but you've got new businesses in the TIF area that you're getting a percentage of that makes up the switch. So, you know, it's very fluid when it comes to trying to anticipate sales tax.
And the reason that I bring that up is if we were to, just say for the sake of argument, we were to decide to make that decision when it comes to TIF funding, and we're going to bring it down to 7 or 8%, and we're putting it into general funds, we would have the ability to shift back and say, okay, we're just going to have to cut general funds and redo that up. Whereas if they are dedicated to a specific purpose, we have a little less latitude to change that percentage. Is that correct? Or is
Well, you know, if it is determined that, you know, we need more than 7% to go into a TIF fund, we're going to have to do that. That is an obligation that we have to the entities that are in the TIF. And so what we'll do is, as we do with any time that we have a shortfall, is we will put budget strategies together to make up the difference.
But we're basically putting ourselves in a position to where coming up with a shortfall, I don't know that you can quantify it, but we are increasing, you know, by bringing it down 7% instead of 8%, we are increasing that risk to some degree. Yeah, okay, I'm just, the thing is, we're talking about rolling the dice here a little bit, and I would like to know the odds as well as we can know them going in.
Yeah, and I wish I could give you the odds, but, you know, it is, again, if sales tax holds, you know, and what we believe is now going to be freed up and not a TIF obligation because of those expired TIFs, then I think, you know, we're in good shape and we go forward, and this is a sustainable revenue. But there are a lot of ifs that we're just going to have to monitor, which is one of the reasons we were, as staff, recommending option 1, which is a mid-year adjustment, because that gives us a little bit more time to analyze that revenue stream from those expired TIFs to determine, is that truly a sustainable revenue? We certainly can cover it in 2023. We have the reserves in the TIF fund to manage that. But again, when, especially with personnel costs, you don't want to make that decision in a vacuum and just look at 1 year. Which is why we were recommending a little bit of sort of creating our own safety net by setting aside some of those already spoken for ARPA funds. That is the ability to use that if we find out that this is not sustainable and we need to look at a more long-term solution. We at least can have the funding to deal with our new base and give us time to then find a more permanent solution.
On option 1, and I just want to, I believe this is the case, but I do want to verify. So the review, TIF mid-year review, are we then obligated, or would it be require another vote of the commission to release those funds for basically a third increase for sheriff's department?
It's however you all want to structure it. My recommendation is we would come back to you and give you a financial analysis of what we're seeing, where we are, and, you know, the sustainability of doing this option.
But what I'm asking, yeah, and it would depend, because if we say, yeah, we're going to do this, my question is, and I guess it's a question for the commission, are we going to lock ourselves in to an automatic increase in midsummer, or is that something that we have any discretion of? Because we can review it, but does the review mean we review it with the option of deciding whether to go forward with that, or does the review just mean, here's where we're at, so strap yourself in? That's kind of what I'm looking for is, and maybe that's a decision that has to be made by this commission, I'm sure it does, but do we need to, are we obligating ourselves with option 1 to having a third pay increase in midsummer?
Well, nothing would be in the budget for 23 if you picked option 1, other than raising everything up to the 48, because we would come back to you and you would do a budget amendment if you decide to do that in July and raise it to 50,000 and give everybody a $2,000 increase. So it's going to take commission action.
That's
for
what
that
I
particular
was trying to
process.
confirm, was this, we're not doing something that's going to put us on automatic pilot, but that we have the ability to walk it back if we discover that it is not in fact sustainable, to be able to go forward on those. Like I say, one of the things that concerns me the most is how it is we are able to fund increases for the rest of our employees, for all those other folks. And I realize that, you know, the sheriff had said last meeting that his goal was to bring them up to 63,000, which would be 3.3 million above the million that we have allocated for an increase in wages for this particular budget. So that's a lot of money, and if that's truly where we're going, I don't see how maybe there's something I'm missing here, but I'm trying to see how it is that we take care of the other employees.
Well, again, I would say to you that this handles 23. We're trying to look forward that there's a sustainable revenue to help pay for the new normal. But beyond the new normal, there is no guarantee to any of our employees in our organization of what a salary adjustment will be in 2024.
Right.
Until we put the budget together and see what's happening with sales tax. And that's not any different than in any of our prior practices in the budget.
We just put the bar a little bit higher.
Yeah.
Yeah. A considerable amount higher.
Yeah.
Actually.
Our base is certainly going to go up by, you know, $1 million with this particular option.
Yeah, and like I say, that's my concern, is our sustainability and our ability, because you know, we can't afford to lose some of the non-sheriff employees because we're not able to give them a living wage. With that, I'll go ahead and move on. Commissioner Lawson.
Okay, so, number one, you're saying that, well, first of all, we can presuppose till we're all dead, as far as how is this tax going to go? Are we going to get the TIF? How much is the TIF going to be? You know, we can look at all of those many things, but in a way, that's what we were elected to do, is make decisions, number one. So let's make a decision. If we went with the 50,000 and we gave it to these guys and gals in February, okay? Do that right away, which is my desire. But if we did it that way, then you're saying it's not going to affect existing employees in any way, shape, or form. If people are already in other departments, road, bridge, whatever, they're already set up to get a raise this coming year, this year. They're going to get it, right?
Well, right now, I would say
Okay.
yes, it's still in the proposed budget that all other personnel, not in the prosecutor's office, not in the sheriff's office, are scheduled, we budgeted for an 8% cost of living.
Okay, and
that's still in there.
Okay. And in your opinion, and I'd like to ask the same thing of the auditor, in your opinion, there is no way to do the 50, do it now, unless we do the ARPA, which I thought is something we didn't want to touch and didn't want to do. But, you know, maybe that's the answer. But you're saying no way we can do that?
Oh, no, you can do that.
Okay.
You can fund, we can transfer it out of TIF, and then, you know, depending on what happens at 2024, you know, the question is, if revenues go down, and you know how tight our revenues are now, the reason we're able to do the 50 in 2023 is because we have money in TIF.
Sure.
Excess fund balance.
Okay.
If we don't have that and revenues go down, then we're going to have to make some difficult decisions in '24 on what we can fund.
So in 2024, it might be a situation where what we do for our officers is they get a cost of living and they don't get another raise. Is that feasible?
It could be, or it could be that, you know, again, across the board, we may not have the funding to do a cost of living.
Okay.
You know.
Okay, well, all right. Can I ask the auditor a question?
Yes, Victor Hurlbert, Clay County Auditor. No, I think budget officer really, same comments there. I mean, so, there's really no requirement per se to do this collateral option. It's just a conservative approach to make sure we have kind of a backstop in case the economy goes south as far as sales tax revenues. But to your point, as far as can we fund a full $50,000 option this year with the TIF balance, we can. The funding's there, so we're talking about concerns about going forward. So yeah.
Do we know what, I know there were 2 TIFs that went off. Do we have a feel for what kind of money we're going to see? Just blue sky?
So if I may, I mean, just kind of briefly, and like the administrator said, I think, it
Speak
is-
up just a tad
I
louder.
apologize. I need to speak in the microphone. No, I think like Administrator said, we would like more data. Both of these TIFs, the Liberty Triangle and then a few sub-projects in the Shoal Creek, ended really almost the end of 21. So we've had a good amount. There's a lot of lag in sales tax data, as we know, in 22. So, I mean, we can do an analysis today based on the early, annual information, and it does, free up roughly, a good amount of $1.2 million per year based on the current projections and assuming those factor trends going forward. But again, to the other discussion point is, I think there's a concern that funds, this baseline, but then the question becomes, what about, going
Okay.
forward? So, but I mean, when you think about TIF, we should think of, that's kind of a separate discussion because, currently it's 50% of economic activity taxes. So if those, if that activity decreases, then the same delta obligation remains. So I want it, that same, spread based on, should hold based on our current TIF. But like presiding commissioner said, what's the future of TIF and economic activity? So that's kind of how I see things there.
Okay. And then I just have one last question, then I'll shut up. Sheriff, front and center, please.
Yikes.
Just a quick question for you. As I've said, I like the 50, and I like the 50 now. Tell me your feelings, and be very honest, and I know you will. How do you feel about utilizing the $800,000 from the ARPA to do that?
If we use the $800,000 from the ARPA funds for the Law Enforcement Resource Center, it would change every number that we've provided as far as the sustainability of the LRC, as well as the services that we could provide or offer, not provide, but offer. And so anything that we thought we would be able to bring in to kind of sustain us through that year, those numbers would all change and we would have to go back to the drawing board.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Commissioner Wagner.
Thank you very much. So my questions, I think, may end up contradicting one another, but I don't care. That's okay. So I'll give a quick quiz, I guess, for anyone who wants to take it up. So I am now staring, and my colleague can attest to, I am staring at a map of the Shoal Creek TIF. And so since it's been 3 years since I dealt with it, because I dealt with it the 8 years prior, I know a little bit, but one of the things I cannot remember is what are the areas that are coming off? Yeah.
I think I'll let Victor, the auditor, respond to that, but I think it's the area where Walmart is,
So
and Target, and maybe Sam's Club?
so you got, so
I don't know
Walmart.
which phase that is.
So Walmart and Target are, well, no, they're all in it. No, Target would be in phase L and the Walmart would be in D, I think, if I'm looking at that map correctly. And the Sam's would actually be in G. I think they've got a little while. So the reason I ask is it gets exactly to the question of sustainability, because Kansas City is relying on that to fund the soccer complex that currently sits at just off of 152. They have bonded against what's coming off of these TIFs as well as KCI TIF. So I asked the question because there's a certain bit of history for years that at least the TIF Commission in Kansas City has as far as the performance of these areas dating even back to the 2008 recession all the way through the COVID-related downturn and so on. So I feel like there is a certain bit of performance that we should be able to expect that goes back quite a lot of years. And again, there's been bonding done both for the Shoal Creek TIF and now for the soccer complex on 152 that really relies on this area's performance. So I feel like there is something that should give us at least some idea of what to expect, even if there's a downturn this year, there's at least a couple downturns to compare to. So I feel like there's at least some opportunity to be a little, you will never be completely certain, but at least have some confidence in what you're projecting, I think, I guess would be my take on that. The question, though, that at least I'm trying to get through is, well, let me go back just for a minute since it was talked about. The ARPA funds, if I'm hearing you correctly, Diana, is this is a backstop, or that is a backstop if these taxes don't perform within the, so it's not like we're saying, give up your money, Sheriff. It is that I may need a backstop to do this other thing,
Right.
which then gets back to, if I know the performance of the taxes, then I know if I may need that backstop or not. So I'm trying to understand that's what we're saying there. But then to the, I'll let since the sheriff decided to sit a little closer, probably a good idea. Question kind of on the answer that you provided to Commissioner Larson. Lawson. Gosh, what am I saying? I'm sorry. It's been, gosh, we have late meetings here. Why do we do that? Anyway, so that changes the way you look at the project. So I guess my question is, if you were to actually take this out to bid for construction, there is no way to phase that such that if you had to pull back a $500,000 or an $800,000 portion of the project, you really couldn't do it? Is that kind of how I should read that answer?
Well, I mean, anything can be done. If I had to, worst case scenario, I would phase it in backwards to at least get the ranges in place, and then whatever's left over for the building. And the problem is, whenever you do training for firearms, you have to have a classroom space.
Sure.
And if we don't have the space available, then it doesn't make sense to, go to our training room and then drive all the way out to Missouri City and then get set up and stuff like that. So could we? Absolutely. I mean, we've worked with far less, so I'm not going to say it's not impossible.
Sure. But maybe to again kind of see where the flexibility lies, assuming that you had the full boat, you were going to just go ahead and put it out to bid and start building. When does it go? When do you assume it goes under construction at this point?
I have no idea. I don't even know how to answer that.
Okay.
All the conversations that we've had is there's a lot of groundwork that needs to be done. And with the freeze and the inclement weather and stuff like that may push the project to the right from groundbreaking. So we may have some time. I just don't know how to answer that because.
And that's fair, and I understand that. I guess part of my reason in asking is it's all a timing issue as far as when the guarantee is needed and when the money is needed to actually do the project. And maybe
Well,
we were
I
talking
mean,
about that.
You're exactly right. I mean, that's what we were trying to figure out because I think right now they're still working. We don't have a site plan yet that's actually been submitted to staff to even review. I mean, I know they're working on that. And so,
Right.
the question is, do we have that conversation with them and how could we phase it? What would those dates be? And would we be far enough along with our forecast of revenues that, as you said, we could free up the backstop? And so I think, if that's a consideration of the commission, I think we just have to be at the table with, the sheriff and his consultants to say, how do we do that? Because, it'll take some time, for that construction to take place, and how do we phase it, that it may be well into 2024, and we know
Sure.
and could free it up.
Well, because this really is a timing issue at the heart of this whole conversation is when do you need money? And we've got the project and we've got salaries, and so when does, how does all that coincide? So I'll let you figure out those details, but I appreciate the answer. And then maybe for the last question, I do want to have a better understanding. I mean, I understand we create new baselines and all that sort of thing. Get that. But as we've talked about here, we have a very real and a very ongoing problem related to reserve and carryover and how we look at that as income when in my book it's really not. And so do we have a projection under any of these scenarios as far as what does that actually mean for a carryover and reserve? And I thought, well, this will be a leading question. What are we inviting as far as how that reserve and carryover will look coming into a 2024 budget? Or are we to assume that that is less of an issue if sales tax holds, and therefore the 7% in TIF allocation, that 3% difference kind of keeps everything steady.
Yeah, your last statement is absolutely correct. Again, if the economy holds, if we think the numbers are where we think they're going to be, reducing from 10 to 7 frees up 3%, doesn't go to the TIF fund, is now funds we can use, and we believe that will sustain this going forward. It does capture most of that. But, you know, it does capture it and can use that, and so we're sort of in status quo, right? So to Commissioner Nolte's point about, well, what do we do about other employees? What do we do about increasing road projects or park projects or, you know, any of those, doing more work on facilities? You know, we have to take that as revenue projections come in above our new baseline. Unless we start talking about what are some other alternatives for revenue streams. And we have some ideas, and certainly we'll want to sit down and talk to the commission about that, but it will take time to put some of those in place. And what this plan does is buy us some time.
Gotcha. One last question for the sheriff, and then I will turn off this mic. One of the things that we've talked about extensively, and you've talked about extensively in here and in other venues, is that step plan. And in my head, I'm trying to get my arms around, how does this ask fall into that planning? And I'll just say, you know, there's a part of me that thinks I'm good with 48 today, but I'll do 50 tomorrow when I know some of these answers, but also understand how that fits into that whole step plan. So whether it's 50 today or 50 tomorrow, can you even give a flavor of how does that work in what you're trying to work on with that whole step plan?
So whether it's 48 or 50, it's going to bring us one step closer to that step plan. I would say that if it's 48 today, then consider whatever it costs to have a $7,000 increase for next year. So yes, it would bring us one step closer, but like I had discussed last week, it almost feels like that perpetual phase. And if we do it phase by phase or step by step, then if we're not catching up, we're only falling farther behind. And so that pay scale, whatever it's going to be next year or the year after, it's going to continue to slide right. And if we're not able to meet at a good solid point, then we're just going to continue to fall further behind.
No, I can appreciate that, and I guess what I'm trying to figure out is what kind of department are we financially from a salary standpoint? Are we low? Are we middle? Are we high? And that's simplifying it, of course. But and I know within that, then you're chasing a market. You're having cost of living adjustments in there. But nevertheless, there is at least some idea of, or at least in my experience, there is some idea of these are the ranges that we should be shooting for, because within this broader market, this is the position that we're going to take, either because this is just financially what we can afford and so on and so forth. So I guess what I'm trying to understand is just the smaller I go, the more catching up I have to do. But when have I caught up? And is it you got to get to 63,000 in today's dollars, as you were pointing out last week? But since the market's always moving, 63 today is something else tomorrow. And so there's that time movement, which then gets into 5-year planning and understanding where we need to be over time. I'm dumping a lot on you, but I guess I'm just trying to understand what our choices are, and based on those choices, what does that mean within the market? And do I inadvertently, through deciding on 48 or 50, I'm pushing the market further, and someone else is going to go do 52 tomorrow, and someone the next day is going to do, you know where I'm going.
Absolutely. And, you know, great questions. So just to simplify it, 48 will still keep us at the bottom. 50 will bring us up towards the mid-range, but probably just below mid-range of the mid-range. But I also want to add that even though the market is doing what it's doing right now, at some point, it's going to equalize. You know, the same issues that we're talking about here with the amount of money that's available is the same issues that the cities are dealing with. And when they run out of money to continue to increase their salaries, that's the point where it's going to equalize. From what I understand and from everything that I'm learning from people representing different municipalities, is that equalization is near. In some cases, the question is, how do they even sustain what they've done? And so if that truly is the case, then next year, that market may be the same as this year, and the year after that, you know, until, you know, either a sales tax is passed, which no one wants to put that on the ballot, and if that continues the route that it's going, we will likely not see an increase in salaries in the majority of those municipalities that I had presented to or provided to the commission. With that being said, that gives us more time to get to that mid to upper mid range. That's where we're competitive, because the sheriff's office, again, opportunities. You go to a police department, you have patrol and investigations. If you want to climb the ladder, you have to wait till somebody retires or, heaven forbid, dies. So you really only have two tracks. With the sheriff's office, yeah, we might be at that mid-range, but we're still competitive, and we have the opportunities. And that's the advantage that we have that the other cities don't, or that the other municipalities don't. So when it comes to hiring, retention, we're not going to have as many issues as we have seen in years past as those other municipalities continue to increase their salaries. Moving forward, we're not going to have those same issues.
Gotcha. Thank you. Thank you very much.
I just want to follow up on one of Commissioner Wagner's issues, and that is when it comes to the training facility. And just, this is more informational, that is, where are we at in the process? In other words, how far have we gone down that road? Is it possible to delay the entire thing until we have the numbers and we have some confidence that we will or will not need those? Because it's better to make changes before you break ground, obviously, than when you've already broken ground. So what I'm looking for is, do we have a general contractor? Do we have, what all do we have yet to do? Where are we at in this process? We kind of an idea of whether we can pump the brakes a little bit and buy ourselves some time to analyze where the market is going.
So the easy answer is we have all of our partners in place that are going to be involved in the project, but we've kind of pumped the brakes ourselves because we didn't know what was going to happen after these discussions, and we didn't want to go down the path of thinking that we have $6.9 million to spend on the project, and it ends up being $6 or whatever the case may be. So everyone's pretty much on standby right now. We have not broken ground. You would know that because you'd be in hard hats carrying shovels. So we're not quite there. And like I said, with the weather, and it could very well push it to the right. But another concern that I wanted to add to the earlier discussion is the availability of resources. The availability of product. So when we're talking about, could we push this to the right to 24? Maybe, and not within our control, because the building material is not available because there's an 18-week wait on it, you know, stuff like that. So I just wanted to add that to the other discussion. But we haven't broken ground yet. We're still talking with partners, and we have everything on standby.
Do we have a general contractor or anything like that at the moment?
I believe we do not.
Okay, so we're still a ways from getting anything, so maybe, because this project, it doesn't sound like, I don't know where we're, again, that's what I was asking is, do we even reach a decision point on this for some time? Because without a general contractor already named, I mean, we're still way in advance of breaking any kind of a ground, so the idea of, I don't know, maybe we don't really need to delay this project because it is so far from where we would have to start signing contracts, because there's very few things committed to, I'm sure at this point. We could hardly be signing very much in the way of contracts, maybe a few preliminaries. So really we haven't spent that much money yet. And what I'm wondering is, do we want to hold off making those commitments until we have numbers that would make the auditor and the administrator feel a little more comfortable about where our projections are, so we kind of have an idea of where we are and not say, well, gee, Mr. Sheriff, you need to, we give you a more solid number as far as what we would require that to be reduced by, if anything. So that's kind of where I'm going with my thinking.
You know, I would suspect that at the earliest, summer, is when we would do groundbreaking. And with the availability of everything and the process, getting the master build site plan and all that, we could see fall. And if that pushes it to the right enough, then to your point, I think that would work.
Well, and that's kind of what I'm getting at, like I say, because it's not just the groundbreaking, but it's signing papers that then obligate the county to expend those monies, and they are no longer available to supplement what may well be a shortfall. So that's my concern, is to make sure that we're I think it was both Commissioner Wagner and the administrator saying, you know, we're trying to look at the timing and how this stuff falls, because if we've already committed all those ARPA funds, they're not really available to be used then to help supplement whatever shortfalls we might be hitting, you know, this summer. So that's one of the things I was concerned about. I just wanted to clarify, but anyway, other questions or comments from other commissioners? Commissioner Johnson.
So, a couple of things here. First of all, I want to remind everybody why this conversation started, and that was because the Sheriff's Department was so far down on the salary schedule compared to so many other agencies around here. I originally proposed a $52,000 starting salary just to get us started. That I think they need more than that, but I understand, you know, we can't get there right away, but I think we need to make big enough increments to get them there sooner rather than later. And that's why I'm pushing for now, since I can't get my 52,000, the 50,000 option 2. Excuse me. But I want to put out some numbers here that I know all the commissioners already have, but I want to make sure everybody, the public, understands this. Salary comparisons, and we're talking about the $50,000 threshold here. Liberty starts out, Liberty Police Department, at $55,000. KU Med starts at over $60,000. Johnson County Sheriff's in Kansas starts out at over $59,000. Gardner, over $59,000. Prairie Village, over $56,000. Gladstone, $54,000. Leawood, over $53,000. North Kansas City, $52,000. Independence, over $51,000. Lawrence PD is over $50,000. You know, Kansas City, Kansas is over $50,000. And the list goes on, and yet have to be hard pressed to find an agency that makes less than $50,000. And when you do find them, there's two things to consider. One, they're not on the same budget cycle we're on. So come their budget cycle, which may be July, their cost of living increases could potentially kick in, which would put them up much higher than they are now, which would probably put them well over $50,000. But also, as Commissioner Wagner talked about, the top step. You know, our top step, the proposed in the budget now, it would put our county sheriffs at top step at $57,000. Some of these agencies, the top step, like Johnson County Sheriff's, their top step is $91,000. That's a big difference. That's what, a $34,000, $35,000 difference on your top step. Even some of these that start lower, I'm trying to find one that's less than $50,000. You look at Overland Park, they start at $47,000. Again, I don't know if they've had their cost of living, their salaries done yet, but they top out at over $85,000. Those are some big numbers, and I'm not suggesting that we're going to fix all that right now. But those are the things you have to keep in mind. And when we take these baby steps, part of the problem with taking baby steps when it comes to salary or cost of living adjustments, let me give you an extreme example. Just right here in the county, if we give an 8% cost of living adjustment to our starting salary of a deputy, that's about just over $3,000 a year. If we were to give it to our highest paid employee, it'd be over $14,000 a year. That's $11,000 difference. That's an $11,000 difference it would create in that salary between the two of them. If we took it to the next year, that difference would be, let's use the same 8% COLA, it'd be a 11.5, almost a $12,000 difference. So over 2 years, you've now separated those two by over $23,000. Again, I'm using extremes here. But the same concept applies when you deal with these other agencies. And when they're making, you know, $60,000 a year to start, and they're getting a 6% or an 8% COLA or whatever, those COLAs, they make that divide greater and greater every year. And so at some point, we have to say, you know what, we can't just do this incremental stuff. We have to jump in. We have to do this. We have to make this happen. And that's what I think we have to do now. And the top step thing and the step increases, I agree with Commissioner Wagner. We need to address those. Let me put in perspective what we're talking about. We have a $155 million budget, and we're asking for a $900,000 cost here. Let's take some zeros off. You have $155 that you're budgeted for. We're asking for 90 cents. That's about 0.7% that we're looking for. If we can't find 0.7% in a $155 million budget, and we talk about backstop, as Commissioner Wagner said, this training facility, putting the training facility on here as a backstop, as a just in case. That's just one just in case that was recommended by the staff. There's lots of just in cases and backstops that we can decide as time goes on and things change. For example, right now we're down about, I want to say about 10 positions, deputy positions. At $50,000, if they get $50,000, that's $500,000 in salary savings. $500,000 in salary savings if those positions aren't filled. I certainly hope they're filled, at least some of them are, but as I explained a couple meetings ago, it's not easy to fill one of those positions, not only finding the person, but the time it takes. So there's going to be some salary savings there. There's so many different options that can, as a backup, that are available and that we need to look at down the road. But the bottom line is, you know, if you live in Gladstone and you call 911, or you live in Liberty, you call 911, your officer showing up is making $54,000, $55,000 a year. I live in the county. I call 911, the sheriff responds. Right now they're making, bottom is $41,000 for starting, which that's going to be fixed, that's going to go up. But the point I'm making is we have to make it significant, which isn't going to get them competitive yet. They're still not going to be competitive. This is just a start, and we have to take a look through this whole next year of how we get them competitive. And, you know, the last thing I'd want to do is take from the training facility. I think that's important as well, and I think there's other options we can look at, if we need to look at an option. I'm curious as to what our sales tax and use tax for this month. They've come in, right? And how do they compare to our projections for this month?
So Commissioner, Clay County Auditor Victor Hurlbert, I would say, we did receive sales tax. I think, you know, without having implemented the budget yet, I don't know if we'd really look at it from a month-to-month basis. But to just kind of speak to a larger notion, I think, about our projections, I do feel confident in our projections for 2023. That's part of my role as a county officer. And, you know, we make our projections by September 1st to the budget officer. And we monitor those last 3 months. And our projections were actually, you know, really close. And so, you know, the trouble is if you overestimate sales tax revenues or use tax revenues, and then you overspend, the problem is the cash balance at the end of the year, the fund balance that we all pay attention to falls. And I think we've had conversations about that before. I mean, I'll give kind of a broad picture of the way I see things. The general fund in this county, the county's main principal fund, in 2010 ended at $20 million. At the end of 2020, it was $10 million. So over a decade, we saw a 50% drop in this county's fund balance, and there's really no explanation for it. The county grew all that time, so there's this overspending. We've gotten up to $13 million. We didn't see much of an increase. Through 21, we got to $13 million. Through 22, we didn't see much of an increase at all, and our revenue projections were actually low. So we've been fortunate in that regard. And so, it's not my recommendation that we adjust revenue projections at this point. I think it is.
Yeah. No, I'm not suggesting that. But I guess what I'm getting at, I'm telling if I'm wrong, I'm guessing speculating by your answer that you don't want to come out and say this because you think, oh, these dumb commissions are going to rely on this for the rest of the year, but is it safe to say that our sales and use tax income for this month beat your projections? In other words, we brought in more than we thought we would.
I'd say we are still strong. We are still strong. You know, as we've talked about before, you know, sales activity lags a couple months. You know, I guess I'll just say that there are a variety of options to do whatever the commission wants to do, so.
Yeah. I guess I just want to get to the point that, hey, so far, we're 1 month in, we're not sinking. And I get that you don't want to give a specific number. I'm okay with that. I just want confirmation that we're better than we thought we'd be.
Do a comparison to January of this year compared
Right.
to January of last year.
Right.
Because while we did see the last quarter
Right.
of '22, those months were less than the
Yeah.
prior year. So,
Yeah.
you know, and we always usually build growth, right? So, but over a year. not
Yeah,
just a
so
month-long.
that'd be good. If you could give me if you know those.
Yeah, I can pull it up here, you know, momentarily. I think, you know, we did, for January of '23, you know, we did exceed over, last year. You know,
About $500,000?
that's correct, 2.9 million over versus, 2.4 million.
And then use tax was what, about 200,000 over this year?
That one was close, actually. That one is only 4,000 over. And then the law enforcement sales tax was higher by about $90,000, 123%. So it looks like it follows. Sales tax was about 23% higher. So keep in mind, this is, you know, November sales.
Yeah, no, I get that, and those are all good numbers, and that's great, and I get that we don't want to, I'm not suggesting that we change anything as far as your projections, and actually I appreciate your projections, but I just want to make the point, it's you know, we can be naysayers all day long, but, you know, sometimes there's good things that happen too, and sometimes we get some increases in our sales tax and our use tax, and actually, I think our use tax is really going to go up. But nonetheless, I think we're in a position that we can make this happen, at the $50,000 starting salary for the sheriffs, and come back and readdress some of these other issues in the next cycle. We can do that while giving all of our employees that 8% cost of living adjustment that I think was great. And, you know, so one of the things that's been talked about over the years is defunding of police and defunding of law enforcement. And I think probably the next worst thing to defunding law enforcement is underfunding law enforcement. And I think our law enforcement is underfunded for way too long. And, you know, there's a lot of reasons for that. I'm not pointing any blame on that, but I think it's time to bite the bullet. No pun intended, and make that happen. And I'm all for the $50,000 happening as soon as possible.
Commissioner Wagner.
Thank you, and I would agree that we should do 50 as soon as possible. The only question is, when is the possible? And I think that is the question here. I have to ask, though, so because we have a lag in sales tax, when we know what the number is from when the number actually occurred, and this will be a question for you, I think, Victor, so you might as well come up. I appreciate the notion that we did better year over year in November, but it was the holidays, and you always expect the bump to occur during the holidays. But even with the bump, I go back to what is the situation within our reserve, and are we still pulling reserves out as part of this carryover just to get to the budget that we have? Because, well, maybe go ahead and answer that question first. What is our situation with the bump? Does that mean that we've now increased our reserve, or are we still using carryover? What is that situation?
So yeah, it's all about perspective. Is, you know, start at what do you define as the reserve, right? And so you know, it's been county practice in past to basically define a reserve as your rainy day and your contingency reserve. I understand there's, you know, it's I agree. Another understanding is looking at the fund balance. Okay, so how much cash is in the bank, essentially, you know, unencumbered. And so let's look at it in both perspectives. And so, again, I just talked about the general fund, where we're at now, over $13 million. That doesn't change with this scenario. We're using the TIF fund balance.
Right.
So the general fund, balance would stay the same. And since we aren't utilizing more general fund, cash as it is, that would stay the same at least for 23. But then it depends on what are the projections and trends going forward. Can we sustain that to, stay at 13 or continue to increase? As far as the rainy day reserves, we kept that also flat. We made, market improvements, at least in the general fund, rainy day and contingency reserves in the 22 budget, and keeping that at 23. We are building up some reserves in other funds, I think, but we're doing that for kind of those one-time expenses and to pull down grant funding. So I would say, yeah, we're, despite, some really strong economic activity of recent years, we didn't make, a ton of improvements in our financial position. But when you think broadly, we're very low debt.
Right.
We're in a strong net position in that regard. We do have a lot of, free operating cash, if you look at that compared to other jurisdictions and what we can invest. So that's kind of some strengths for us, the way I would look at it.
Yeah, well, my point in asking is just, I believe we do sorely underpay our folks. Understand that, and I think the idea that through what was suggested in this budget, and even in the increase to 48, that's a $6,000. If I understand it right, that is a $6,000 increase year over year. That's significant. I get that it may not be where we want to be, but I guess I don't want to fall into the trap of, hey, we had a good November, therefore revenue is going to come in. If that were the case, that other problems I think would have already been solved. And I guess I'm just trying to understand, if we don't have any more other issues to resolve, then great. But my suspicion is that there are other issues that one good month doesn't necessarily solve. And so.
And admittedly, for 2023, given the economic uncertainty I read a report about November was strong, people increased their purchasing activity, and that December actually kind of declined a little bit. So, it does worth merit looking at that. I think it's all different nationally. Does that ring true for Clay County in particular? But it was my deliberate effort in discussions with, fellow auditors who do this in other counties, looking at different, economists, organizations, to be extremely cautious in projecting, revenues for this calendar year. So that's the approach we took, just to do that.
Understand. Thank you very much, and thank you.
Commissioner Withington.
How much do we have in TIF reserves
Before or after this recommendation?
currently?
Well, so we could fund, as we talked about earlier, we could pull out the 915 and still have reserves in our TIF fund. I think that takes us 600? Yeah. I think it's about a reserve of about 600,000.
Okay.
But let Victor confirm that.
The 8% COLA that we're giving to all other employees, when does that go into effect? Is that mid-year or is that February?
No, that's February, along with what's in the proposed budget, or all those changes for the prosecutor's office, the commission staff in the sheriff's office, and all other departments, February, the first payroll in February, full payroll in February.
Okay. So you had asked us to give you a directive. I'm with Jay and Joanne that I think we should do option 2, 50,000, and it should go into effect in February. So that's where I'm at.
Further comments? Commissioner Carpenter.
Thank you. So, I said last week, and we'll say again, I fully support giving a raise to our sheriff's deputies. I think getting up to market average makes a lot of sense. I mean, the sheriff's pointed out we have other benefits like more promotional opportunities, so that has to factor in, I think, to our consideration. But nevertheless, I do think we've been too low. We ought to get it up. What I will simply observe, stepping back a bit, is our biggest cost in our county budget is our hardworking county employees. Salary, benefits, personnel costs are our single biggest cost. So it simply needs to be understood that when from one pool of money, you take more money from one place and give it to one chunk of those workers, it is by definition going to be the case that in future years we will have fewer dollars for the rest of the workers who are not in that one chunk. Now, I'm not saying that we ought not do it on those grounds, but we should know that that's what we're doing. And the higher we go in one area, the bigger that decrease is going to be for everybody else. So just, I don't think we should be under any illusion that that's not the case. It certainly is. In terms of which option to proceed with, it sounds like what I've intuited from our administrators, that the less risky option is to do 48 and step up to 50 in the summer. I'm comfortable with that option. If it's the will of the commission to go to 50 right away, that is, I certainly think they're owed that amount of money. And I think it will, take us a good step in keeping up with where the market has gone in the region here in terms of law enforcement salaries. But I would just say in general, and I don't, nothing partisan about this at all, but we do have to, when our biggest expenses are paying our workers, and when we have everybody saying that we want to pay our workers more, to continue to do that into the future means we're going to have sufficient revenue to do that, right? And so what we can't be doing is arguing on behalf of tax cuts and then also saying, but we want to pay everybody more. Our budget isn't going to allow us to do both of those things. So in terms of, as we all participate in this mission going forward as a commission, we're going to have to be, I think, making smart financial decisions in terms of making sure we have enough revenue to do the things that we say we want to do, which is pay our people more. And it is not only the number one cost, but we know because of historically low unemployment and because of what's happened with inflation that we are going to have wage pressures again next year. It's going to happen almost for sure. We already, I think, underpay our county employees. And what's happening in the wage market is going to mean that we have to, once again, offer almost for sure some kind of cost of living adjustment next year from the pool of money that is the budget. And how much money will we have there will determine how much we have to do that cost of living adjustment. So I just think that needs to be kept in mind as we have these discussions going forward, that we need to be cognizant of those things and be cautious in terms of the decisions we make on both sides of the ledger, which is, here today we're talking about spending. The other side of the ledger is the revenue side, and obviously we get our revenues via taxation from the residents of the county. So appreciated the discussion. Happy to support, frankly, either increase. I think, again, what I've heard from staff indicates to me that the less risky option is to start at 48 and do the 50 mid-year. That being said, if we decide we're going to, we've got at least several folks who are advocating for doing the 50 right away. I think obviously we can make it work if we need to. But I guess the point that I'm making is I want everybody to keep in mind that we're going to have these wage pressures, not just in the sheriff's office, but across county government going into next year and into the future. And we need to be prepared for that and make smart decisions. Thanks.
I've got to say I agree with an awful lot of what Commissioner Carpenter says. We do have to proceed cautiously and prudently because, once again, we are dealing with taxpayer money, not our own private funds. One of the things that has been talked about is some of the different salaries of different law enforcement agencies. I pulled up some figures today for different county sheriff's departments. Maybe they're out of date, I don't know. What I'm looking at is Platte County Deputy Sheriff starting at 45. I'm looking at Jackson County Sheriff starting at 44.8. And some of the others, some of them are higher, some of them are lower. That doesn't mean we shouldn't be paying our deputies more than we are currently, and I do favor doing that. But I think to do it in a prudent and cautious way, because if we're really shooting for 63 in today dollars, that is a substantial amount of money, and that's going to forestall us spending money in a lot of other areas. I would also point out that I favor the idea of delaying the increase to 50 should we decide to not do that. I, for one, am going to be extremely reluctant to go forward with the sheriff's facility until we understand what it is we're committing ourselves to. It wouldn't be fair to the sheriff to say, yes, you have this money, and then it turns out we don't have it. So we cannot put the sheriff out in a position to where he is thinking he's able to spend X number of dollars on a facility, and now he has to pull it back. We have to go back and talk to whoever the contractors will end up being and all that. So I would say that if we went to the 50 right away, the idea of going forward with expedience on the facility center is something we need to pump the brakes on just a bit further. It may turn out great by this summer, or, you know, we may have a recession. It's hard to say. I don't think we're going to have a booming economy this spring. I think the chances are much more heavily in favor of a recession than a boom economy. That being said, those are my thoughts on the matter, and I think since we've been in this conversation for some time, it might be time to sort of try to get a consensus from the commission of where they want to be as far as which option we would like to, because the thing is, you've got to leave this room tonight with instruction from the commission and able to put our budget together. That's part of the problem with getting this request at such a late hour, is the decision has to be made. This is not something we can contemplate further or research further. This is something that the commission is going to have to make a decision on, and we are going to have to make it today. Unfortunately, we don't have any extra time to consider or to research it. So with that, let me start with Commissioner Withington, and I think if everybody can just kind of identify, and certainly make comment if you care to, but identify which one of the three options that we have, and what I'm going to try to do is write them down and hopefully come up with at least a general consensus of where we are, and then discuss it from there once we go around, a little more discussion, and then we as a commission need to instruct the administrator and her staff on how to proceed. So, Commissioner Withington.
Yeah, so I'm on option 2, 50,000,
Okay.
starting in February. I think that if we're going to give all of our other employees, a cost of living adjustment in February, I think it's only fair that we also take care of our deputies starting in February. Another thing that I was thinking about, we had those outside agencies come here last week and give a presentation. I know we're not statutorily required to fund every single one of them. One of them essentially asked for a blank check. If I don't feel like in good conscience we should vote to give them funding for a blank check, maybe that money could go to the sheriff's office. But that's where I'm at. Option 2, 50,000 starting February.
Commissioner Lawson.
Yeah, I want to remind everybody about one thing. We've got great employees. I've met a lot of them, and I've never met a bad employee yet. I'm so pleased and proud at the type of employees we have. Nobody else but the sheriff's department puts their fanny on the line, life and death. We forget about that. We're reminded when we see someone like the young man that was killed in North Kansas City. My husband lost lots of friends on Kansas City, Missouri. And so we don't want to discount how dangerous their jobs can be. And we're seeing more crime move north. It's going to continue on. So I am solidly at the 50. Pay them in February, and let's get this darn thing done.
So just to confirm, option 2 is the one that you... Yes, sir. Very good. Commissioner Wagner.
Thank you. I'll just say my preference is for option 1. If the body decides to go with option 2, I'm not going to lose a lot of sleep. But I will just simply say that, we sometimes want to turn budget conversations into value arguments, and I would resist that only because at the end of the day, everyone within an organization, whether they want to admit to it or not, always wants to know what the other guy's making. They always do. And I think we have to, it's hard for me to say to anyone that someone is more deserving of funds than you are. But at the end of the day, there's also a market, and the market says if you want people, then you've got to offer something that is competitive. To me, the only question is when, and I like to think I've figured out how the county's taxes are going to work in my 3 weeks being here, but I'm not going to say that. I'm going to say that there's got to be some understanding of what's happening out there. So if we do make a financial commitment, we should at least have some belief that we can follow up on that commitment, because it doesn't make sense to me to say, we're going to get you to here only to come next year knowing we're still going to have to go higher to be competitive and then have a problem keeping up with that. I would just as soon be a little bit cautious. Next year I may go crazy, but at least for now, I want to be a little cautious and see where tax receipts go before I make more commitments, because I want to stick by whatever commitments I do make. Thank you.
Well, Commissioner Wagner, we will certainly monitor your craziness.
Get in line.
Commissioner Carpenter.
Like I said, I think probably the more prudent option is to go with option 1.
Commissioner Thompson.
Thank you. No, I stand with option 2. I would like to see our deputies making $50,000 starting in February.
Very good. Commissioner Johnson.
I'm also 50K option 2, and I think it's because that's what the citizens want. I think that's what my constituents want. I think I heard them loud and clear that law enforcement was their priority, so that's why 50K option 2.
Okay, it is my sense, and we can certainly discuss this, my sense of the comments that we just heard is that option 2 seems to be, while not overwhelmingly, but seems to be the consensus of this commission. Would anyone like to comment before we give instruction to the administrator to go forward with option 2? Very well, seeing none. Administrator, obviously you assembled these, so you have, I think, a pretty clear idea of what's going on. So are you comfortable with the amount of instructions you've gotten to go forward?
Yes. So we will, as we talked about those budget adjustments early in tonight's discussion, so we will go with this option, and so we'll make those necessary changes so that we come back next week with a budget for your consideration for adoption. It will reflect this direction. A couple of things I would like to add before we leave this item.
Yes.
Commissioner Wagner was talking to the sheriff about where do we want to be. And so we have talked at the last meeting or so about, at some point in time, the county really should invest in a compensation and classification study. And as typical, as part of those plans, the elected body makes a decision on where they want to be. Do you want to be in the 75th percentile? Do you want to be at the midpoint of whatever it is? And so you, as an elected body, will set that goal and that target as part of that study whenever we do it. And then that's what we strive to work for each time that we take a look at adjustments for pay plans. The other item I wanted to clarify is, Commissioner Johnson talked about the vacancies in the Sheriff's Department and vacancy savings, and you're absolutely correct. There are savings there. But I also would remind the Commission that, especially in our 24/7 operations in the Sheriff's Department and the detention facility, we don't necessarily get the benefit of the vacancy in salaries, because what we see is our overtime goes up, because you have to backfill those positions. You need individuals working in the detention facility. You have minimum staffing on the road. So while we might see savings for our vacancies in the highway department or the parks department, because we don't have to backfill those and have somebody to fill that slot, certainly in the sheriff's department we do, and how we've been able to accommodate that and not go too far over our total personnel budget is because those vacancy savings have been utilized to offset our increase in overtime. So just wanted to share
Thank
some
you.
of that with the commission and the public.
Does anybody, I mean, we will leave it, we've talked at it ad nauseum, but the thing is, it's an important subject, and I want to make sure no commissioner felt they've not been heard. I believe everybody feels they've been heard on this subject, so please continue with our next item under the budget.
Thank you, and if I can, it went to sleep on me, so if Mike could, thank you. So I wanted to give the opportunity for commissioners to talk about any other adjustments or considerations in the budget that you may have in the proposed budget. Certainly Commissioner Withington brought up, the outside agencies, which were here last week, and presented some information to the commission. And we've had some follow-up questions from commissioners to some of the outside agencies. So I just bring that up as one topic, but certainly want to throw it open to the commission if there are other items in the proposed budget that you would like to discuss and make any adjustments to.
I'd like to follow up on Commissioner Withington's comments, and that is, it seems to me that there are still outstanding questions when it comes to some of the outside agencies. As you're certainly aware, and we're all aware, some of those are in fact statutory. It would be my recommendation, I don't have a motion or anything like that, but I feel prudence dictates that while we allocate that money, I think that those monies should not be released until the questions of the commissioners are answered, so that we know what it is we're doing. And I would go so far as to say, perhaps on an agency like the EDC, perhaps we do a little bit like we had suggested possibly doing with the sheriff's budget, and that is to say, at mid-year, we get a review and a report back from EDC so that because they are unusually large in their allocation, so that we get a report back, and then upon review of the commission in mid-year, then we release the residual amount of those funds. So I'm kind of thinking in those terms. That's just a recommendation, not a motion. Commissioner Wagner.
Thank you, and I'll just offer a suggestion as well. It seems to me that the habit has been, if you're in the budget, you get the money. But as we talked about, even with some of the earlier items today, one can make the suggestion that it is budgetarily authorized, but that is different from actually awarding a contract. And to me, I guess the world I'm used to is one where there is a contract, there is a scope provided in there, there are deliverables within it, so that whenever that contract goes and therefore those dollars are provided, there is at least some understanding of what is expected as part of that contract, and then reporting is done against that. And so my suggestion is merely one of, I don't have heartburn having any of those organizations within our budget, but where I do wonder is, how are we doing that contracting, and how are we doing that accountability? And I do appreciate our colleague making the request that they come here and speak to us, but I think there are other things that we can do to hold those agencies to greater accountability and be consistent with whatever direction that we have. So I'll just leave it at that, but that would be my suggestion.
Just have one quick, on that topic, a question for the counselor, and that is, it's my understanding that at one time we, in the particular case of EDC, had an agreement where we had a contractual thing, and it seems to have, am I mistaken in that thinking, or have we ever had an agreement with EDC? Because it's been maybe less formal than is the ideal.
We actually have contracts with all the outside agencies that came last week, and I actually, in preparation for that meeting last week, I reviewed those contracts. So I would respectfully probably agree with Commissioner Wagner. This is probably less a budget issue than it is a contract issue. I expect those contracts will be coming to you very soon, and that's really probably a really good time to address the deliverables, what you're getting out of the contracts, and what you're putting into them.
Well, where I'm kind of going with this is, if we can maintain those budget line items with the caveat to alleviate those who might have concerns, and I think we all, to some level, have some concerns, if we can address those at least this time around in the contract phase, and then we have a year to figure out whether or not we feel that those we can evaluate the value of those relationships and whether they should go forward. So I think I would like to see us maybe do a little closer look at the contracts we have, especially on the larger agencies, and make sure that we are doing our due diligence on that. So those contracts have been kind of renewed over time. This might be a good opportunity, especially with the enhanced size of the commission, to review those and to put those out. Because if we do send those, if we do approve this and send the contracts out, my sense is we're probably going to get a bill from those agencies. And while we will need to vote to release those funds, I think it's only fair to start putting down what our expectations are as we go forward. Does that sound like a way to, at least on that one part of the budget, does that sound like something that we should maybe go forward in that line?
Yeah, we have to be good stewards of our funds, and, you know, when an agency comes in and literally says, we'll figure out what we're going to do with the money if you appropriate it to us, I can't in good conscience vote to give somebody a blank check. I want to know how they're going to spend it before I vote on it. I want measurables. I want metrics. I want to see how we're getting a return on that investment. And, you know, the budget's our biggest priority, or biggest thing that we're going to do as a commission. And we need to make sure that we're spending that money correctly. I mean, roads, bridges, and public safety are probably the two most important things that we can do as a government. So if we're wasting money and it could go somewhere else, I would rather invest it in something that's going to actually serve every citizen of this county. So I'm with you guys. I think we need deliverables, metrics. We need to find out the return on our investment.
I think return on investment is an awfully good thing for us always to keep in mind when we're looking at budgetary type of issues. The sense I get is that the counselor has already anticipated some of our thoughts on this. So could I ask if it's the consensus of the commission, ask the counselor to go ahead and review and give us, based on this conversation, any suggestions for any changes in those contracts? Okay, that sounds good. And is everybody comfortable with those instructions to council? Okay, that being the case, and let us know if you require any further guidance. Are there any other, that was just obviously one part of it. There's a lot going on in our budget. Are there any other questions or comments regarding the budget? Because as it has been pointed out, if you got some changes, now's the time. And we need to make sure that the administrator and her staff, or I should say chief budget officer in this particular role, has clear instructions so that they can put together a budget that will be put before us for consideration at our next meeting. Is there any question, comment, or any other issues? All right, seeing none, I assume then, I'd asked before, but I'll ask again, do you want to go forward with the rest of, do you have some more things to present to us?
Just quickly, if Mike will, again, advance my slide for me, thank you. So certainly appreciate everyone's due diligence in the budget process. And so again, we want to just make sure and share, you know, this has been a very long process, very in-depth process, and certainly want to thank, you know, all the department heads, all the office holders, the audit staff that have, you know, done lots of work and will be burning the midnight oil between now and next Wednesday to make the adjustments that you all, because while that sounds simple, making all those line item changes in salaries for sheriff, it's a lot of data that our staff will be working on, and we will certainly get that to you and present that budget to you next week. We will hold a public hearing and then on your agenda to adopt the 2023 budget. So again, appreciate everyone's due diligence, appreciate everyone's staff and reading all the information, attending all the workshops. And again, if Mike goes to the next slide, we again want to continue to make sure that our public stays engaged in our budget process. Again, all the information has been out on the website, and we'll continue to have information out on the website about this presentation and next week's amended, adjusted proposed budget for your consideration and adoption, and we're happy to answer any questions.
Thank you very much. Thank you to you and your staff for all the hard work that you've put in. And thank you to the commission, because we've had a good discussion and a more lively discussion than we've had in the past, and that's a positive thing. Open, transparent government that serves the people is not necessarily free of mess or free of controversy, but I think what we've been able to do is to vet a lot of the issues that we had and come to a consensus that we feel is in the best interest of the people. So thank you for your participation in this process, and somewhat of an apology that it's a necessity of the calendar that you have so little time to get up to speed, but all commissioners, I think, have participated very well, particularly the new commissioners who are drinking out of the fire hydrant currently. So with that will end our discussion item. That brings us to comments from the county administrator.
Thank you, Commission. Just a couple of items. First, the next commission meeting is next Wednesday, the 25th at 6 o'clock here in the commission room. Also, we have on the agenda for some discussion about meetings in March. So as you know, we meet every week on a Wednesday, and in March there are 5 Wednesdays in that month. And so we've kind of taken the liberty to look ahead to determine when are the schools in spring break. Spring break is typically in March. And so North Kansas City School District and Liberty School District are both having their spring breaks the week of March 20th. So what we would propose to you all for consideration is that you have meetings the first, second, third, and fifth Wednesday of the month. So that would be March 1st, March 8th, March 15th, and then March 29th. So we would skip the week of March 20th, which is the 4th Wednesday. So everyone that, has children or want to take advantage of spring break, there would not be a meeting that week. We like to do this ahead of time because certainly many of our things, especially coming out of planning and zoning, we like to be able to work with our applicants so they know what the schedule is going to look like for their projects.
Very good. Thank you. That brings us to commissioner comments. Commissioner Johnson.
Just a couple quick thank yous. First to our county administrator and her staff for the budget. I know this is not her first rodeo putting together a budget, but it is the first time she's done it for this county, and it's the first time she's done it with whatever's going on up here with the 7 of us. Went from 3 to 7 in the middle of that budget process, and so I just want to compliment her and her staff for a great job on that. And I also want to compliment Kip Jones for his presentations. He does an outstanding job in his presentations of these zoning issues, and short, concise, to the point. I like the PowerPoints, and he does a great job, so I just want to say I appreciate that. Thank you.
Commissioner Thompson.
Commissioner, I actually have no additional comments today. I think I've been the quiet one, and I think I'm going to continue that. So I hope we all can just get home tonight. So,
Commissioner Carpenter.
No comments, thanks.
Commissioner Wagner.
I will just say thank you to everyone for this whole process. I do appreciate Kip's production values. He's really bringing it up, everyone, so I'm getting expectations. Finally, I was trying to go for the whole Red Wednesday look since we don't meet on Friday, but nevertheless, go Chiefs.
Commissioner Lawson.
Yeah, thank you. I'd like to say thanks to everybody. Diana, I noticed you have a little less hair than you had when you came. It's going to get worse. But thank you for all you do. And I would like to thank our auditor. This kid is amazing. And if you go down and ask him anything, he's right there giving you the full 24. And I appreciate working with him, and I think he does a phenomenal job. He's done all of the visuals that we see. His group has produced those, and I think they're pretty stunning. So very good job. I also want to thank Kip. And the thing that I liked the most about your presentation was the drapes party. Thought that was pretty sharp. But anyway, thank you other commissioners for all of your thoughts. Some of you didn't vote like I wish you had, but your reasoning is sound, and I am so thankful that we're able to agree to disagree and get along. And love you all, and thanks for those that supported our sheriff.
Commissioner Withington.
Yeah, I have a couple things. First, I want to give a shout out to Superior Bowen Asphalt. They recently, over the weekend, received first place in the 2022 Quality Paving Award from the Missouri Asphalt Paving Association for their work on the airport up at Mosby. So congratulations to them. I was going to wear my Chiefs jersey, but I thought I'm already the most underdressed person up here. I thought that'd be a little too casual, so, but go Chiefs. And then also, after last week's meeting, I sent a couple follow-up emails. I went back last Thursday morning and I rewatched the presentations from our outside agencies. And I had some follow-up questions to Northland Neighborhoods, Inc. and to the EDC. I sent an email. I did copy all of our commissioners on there, but I just want to give a copy to whoever I need to give it to you to make sure that these are included in the public record. I don't want anybody to say that I was having a conversation that was unnoticed or anything like that. So I just want to make sure that this is included in a public record, so.
And I have no comments, except that I agree with all the comments made. That brings us to recess and adjournment, my very favorite part.